Okay, now can you hear me? Can you hear me now? What's that commercial? Um, yes. Thank goodness. I just had to reconnect my mic. I don't know. I don't know what the hell is wrong with it. I literally just had to plug it back in and out. So, in and out, as they say. Is it Verizon? Um, I thought I was gonna have to restart the live. I mean, I would have restarted it anyways. Should I restart? Because we wasted some time. Fuck it. Um, I'm cute. You're cute. Yes, yes, we're all cute. Thank you, cuties, for being here. As I was saying before, I was rudely interrupted by my mic. Loud and clear. Oh no, am I too loud now? Good, because I'm a loud ass bitch, anyways. But let's get right into it. I said hello, welcome. I didn't go live yesterday, but don't worry, I got a lot of stuff coming up this week. So pencil me in your schedule, please. We are continuing Mackenzie Shirilla court transcripts for the juvenile hearing. Once we are done with those, I'm going to we're getting close actually. But I have the regular child transcripts. Yes, 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 I do. We're gonna go over them. Let me see. I believe we're a little bit over half in the juvenile ones. We're going to go over the adult trial. I also have been working very diligently and hard on I'm going through what we are reading thus far or what we have read thus far of this hearing, and I'm like doing a lot of research, connecting things and unconnecting things, and so it's a whole thing. It's like a whole school project. So I am doing that with what we have read so far. Also, there is a Kenzie update, and I'm going to be back live possibly today. Um, if not today, tomorrow I'll start earlier. But I'm going to try to come back today for there's a bunch of stuff I want to review, and then there's new cases we're going to be getting into. So there's that. I'm not gonna make this long live too long. I don't want the replay viewers to have to sit through like a 3 hour live. So I'm gonna start cutting down shorter on the readings, and then that way I can do other stuff too. So yeah, keep your eye out. I think we're gonna be going over the Kenzie update after this live. So please make sure you hit the like button. Let me say hello to everyone and I'll get started. Oh, because I restarted. Hold on, I need to bring up the let me see who's I see Evie here. I see Kate became a member. Thank you, Kate, for becoming a member before we started the live. I see M here, Debbie, J. Lou, inside the mind of Noel. Shout out to the mods, all the mods that are here. Evie, Crees, Abuelita. I saw Debbie. Hello, Debbie. Creatively inspired. Cynthia, Autism Boy Mama became a member. Thank you for doing that. I will be having a members live this week. I'm gonna have to switch it around. There's a lot I have to. I've been working on getting caught up on a couple of new cases, older cases, and also staying in tune with the Kenzie Shirla case. We're gonna remain respectful. I know we agree to disagree on a lot about this case now. Actually, we shouldn't because I just think that she deserves a new trial. That doesn't mean that I think she's 100% innocent. I never have said those words. So, it's a whole thing. We already know this. But we're not instigating, we're not bullying, we're not being mean to each other in chat. Not that I think any of you would do it, but we have come across a lot of butting heads, specifically because I'm fake and wanted to change my opinion and I'm being paid off by the Shirillas. Not respectfully. I'm not being paid off by anyone, first of all, and no one decides what's going to be said out of my mouth and what I think, second of all, unless we lose those rights. And third of all, I never said she was 100% innocent, but I do think Mackenzie Shirla deserves a new trial, and I do think there was shady things going on. So hope we can agree to disagree. And I still respect you. You respect me. Now I'm going to shut up, put the chat up on the screen, and let's get started. We left off on the redirect examination for, was Hazu? Yes, Zaki Hazu. This is exactly where we left off. Hey, ATS, I agree. Yeah, well, I have been like, people hating on me, hating on me because I think she deserves a new trial. That doesn't mean she's innocent. Mackenzie Shirilla, I know for a fact, doesn't even herself say innocent. And I'm not victim blaming. I'm not victim shaming. What is out there is out there. If you haven't seen it, if you have, if you don't mind it, fine. If you do mind it, fine. You know what I'm talking about. So let's just continue to get started. Hey Juvenated, hey Cynthia. Hello, hello. It brings out mean people. I know, and I'm gonna keep my chat friendly and cool. And if not, you're gonna get timed out. Don't worry, you will come back. I'm not blocking anyone. My mods are not like that. We are not like that. If anything, we're a pretty fun chat here. But if you're gonna be instigating and shit talking and bringing up stuff that's not relevant, um, or maybe it is, but it's just gonna be rage baiting, you're gonna get blocked respectfully for 24 hours. Just come back. You can talk to me. You can email me. I'm always pretty open. So you know where to find me. Did you get your lips done or is it new lipstick? Oh my goodness. I want to get lip filler. I'm going to get facial reconstruction surgery too coming up. The trolls need to seriously find something better to do. I'm already exhausted and they're exhausting. Yeah, I know. Well, you need to lay off Melly. We can agree to disagree. That doesn't mean we have to be aggressive or mean. Thank you. That's true. Who's that? I don't know who that is. Cynthia. Hey, 40 love style. Yeah, you can read the appeal or the documents or just watch these lives. My gifted second admission can't miss anything. Okay, thank you, thank you. I've not been snarky because even members that have been supporting me have been so offended that I have changed my mind. Thank you. Your love and mattered. I'm joking. I was joking. Um Moving on. I'm just being an ass. But no, I was never snarky. Some of you sometimes, and I don't mean anyone in specific, um, even somebody else just the other day in the comments can accept that they're like, you talked so bad about Mackenzie. And I'm like, yeah, I did. Some of it I meant, some of it maybe I'll take back if I want. And I already apologized to the Shirillas and Mackenzie because I have no reason to be judging them so hard. What does she change her mind on? That she deserves a new trial? But no, thank you, ATS. It's nothing new actually. Maybe you just missed me and haven't seen me. Just kidding. Okay, I'll shut up. Let's get started. So we left off on the redirect examination of Detective Zaki Hazu. So by Mr. Troop, we're gonna get started there. I think yeah, there's one more file for the bind over, and then we'll jump into the regular trial. Shout out to the person that gave me these as well, who I've been working with. You know who you are. Hearts. Let's continue. Troop says, Detective Jesus handing you States Exhibit 41 and 42. Detective Jesus says, yes, sir. You identified those as autopsy reports for Davian and Dominic. Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, do these exhibits bear the date that those documents were created? Jesus says, I'm not seeing it. Troop says, here, I direct you to the second paragraph, bottom line of the second paragraph. Jesus says, okay, yes. Troop says, when were these created? Jesus says, August 1st, 2022 at 6:07 in the morning. Troop says, okay, 6:07 in the morning. We're talking about 24 hours after the collision, correct? Jesus says, yes. Troop says, okay, had you undertaken your investigation at that point? Jesus says, no. No, sir. Troop says, okay, what information did the medical examiner have at the time that these documents were compiled? He says, I'm sorry, at the time on August 1st, you mean? Jesus says, yes. Troop says, I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're asking. Jesus says, here, did you have the videos that you presented to the court? Jesus says, no. Troop says, did they have your report? Jesus says, no. Troop says, did they have any statements from anybody? Jesus says, no. Troop says, did they have any black box evidence? Jesus says, no. Troop says, did they have a toxicology report? Jesus says no. Troop says, okay, are any of the other evidence that you presented here? Jesus says no. Troop says, are you surprised by findings that were found for the cause and manner of death in this document? Jesus says no. Troop says, okay, you've been involved with homicide investigations before, correct? He says no. Really? You put you put a new detective to this entity, organization that he's working for, who hasn't done homicide investigations on a very complicated case. Mm, I have to wonder. This Kenzie stuff is getting good. We're gonna be reviewing. I just started Court Lurker. I've been following your channel for a couple weeks and haven't caught a live. Oh, welcome. Welcome. Hey, Doreen. Yeah, but if people are here for the right reasons and love you, then they would stay no matter what. We're always going to disagree. I know. I didn't agree with a lot of people on Brian Koberger, and we're fine. We survived. Um, but whatever, everyone's entitled to do what they want, I guess. So Jesus says, no, I haven't been involved in homicide investigation before. That's interesting. Troop says, you never had been involved with a homicide investigation? Jesus says, no. Troop says, never seen one? He says, I never investigated one. And this is my problem. This is my problem. Why this could add to the reasons of why I think she deserves a new trial. The new document we're reading later today, most likely later today, yeah. It gives a lot of good information on where things went wrong. If Detective Hazu has never investigated a homicide before, why are you putting him on one that's complicated and has many different avenues connected to it? Like, why is the DA involved? Nope, they're not investigating Kenzie and Dawn for being cartel members and having 8 grams of shrooms. Let me correct it because the numbers change. 6.91 grams of shroom, if I'm not mistaken. And then how many grams of weed? I don't know. And a Puffco, not even a real bong. It's like an electronic one, I guess, for dabs. But nonetheless, Zaki Hazu should have never been on this. And another reason why he should have never been on this is because he's very familiar with the Russo family. And I don't mean that in a bullying negative way. I'm just saying in police reports that are out there, Detective Zaki Hazu knew exactly who these people were. And I think that's a conflict of interest. And I hope you would think that about a case involving a family member of yours or yourself. That's shady. Hello, Edith. Thank you for being a member, renewing your membership. But let's continue. I have never investigated one. Zaki Hazu. Come to Mellyverse and talk. First time making a live. I feel like I know all of you from my hours of catch up. We are a family here. We're the Babelets. We're the Babelets. We got that term from Kenzie and Dom, respectfully. And yeah, I don't know. I have questions for Zaki Hazu. He says, I have never investigated one. Troop says, I didn't ask you that, detective. Had you, as a police officer, assisted, participated, observed, or otherwise been involved with a homicide investigation? He says, no. That is wild to me. He shouldn't have. Is he training? Like, did he do training? I need to know. Wow. Wow. That explains a lot. He says no. Troop says, you've never been to a homicide scene? He says, no. I work in, and then it's an audible. Troop says, okay, thank you. Is it fair to say there's 2 versions of what Steve Shirilla told Sergeant Doyle at Metro Health? McDonald says, objection. The court says, based on. McDonald, don't forget, is Kenzie's lawyer. McDonald says he wasn't there for either of the statements. It might be that it was reported by somebody, but he wasn't there. The court says, correct. Can you clarify your question? Troop says, okay. The officers who were there wrote supplemental reports who were at Metro Health that day. Question mark. Hazu says, correct. Troop says, okay. And then you got an email from Sergeant, and then it's an audible. Speak up. detective or whoever, prosecutor, troop, can you speak the fuck up? You're in a courtroom where a court reporter has to hear everything you're saying. This is ridiculous. We've had so many inaudibles in here. Respectfully, it's not the court reporter's fault. Somebody said, can you stop saying respectfully? No. That was very aggressive and mean. Sorry. He should have excused himself from the case. Absolutely. Absolutely. Zaki Hazu investigating a very complicated homicide, quote unquote, didn't start as a homicide. Let's also remember that. Kenzie was free for 3 months. And then we find that the bind over wasn't even filed until December. There's a problem. There's a big problem. And if you don't see it, I don't know what to tell you. Doesn't mean you have to like Kenzie and be her BFF. That is not what that means at all. But let's continue. He says, correct. Troop says they recount different versions of the event, correct? He says, yes. Troop says, as part of your investigation, you reviewed Mackenzie Shirilla's driver's license. McDonald says, objection, outside the scope. Troop says, it's not outside the scope. Mr. McDonald asked multiple times about the bad driving on cross-examination. He asked about the 160 incidents of bad driving. The court says, overruled. Troop says, then did you review the driver's license? Hazu says, yes. Troop says, how many points were on it? Hazu says, 0. Troop says, how long did she have a driver's license? Hazu says, I believe based on what she showed me, it was April 22 of 21. I think. I'm not certain. Troop says, I'll accept that. Go to State's Exhibit 44. Hazu says, I've got that. Come close. Troop says, okay, could you please step down? Hazu said, this is a temp. This is an application for a temporary permit. Troop says, when did she seek a temporary permit? Hazu says, October 7th, 2020. Troop says, okay, so a little less than 2 years before the crash. So she had a temporary driver's license because it says here issued on October 7th, 2020. Do you agree? Hazu says, yes. Troop says, okay, thank you. You may take your seat. Troop says, we heard the videos that Dominic made. Were you able to, based on your experience as a police officer, are you able to determine the primary aggressor in those videos? Hazu says no. Okay, if we're not able to determine the primary aggressor in those videos, why are we judging Kenzie so much by those videos and just one video out of so many we do and don't have? Why does that mean she should be in prison for the rest of her life? Does that make her a murderer? A cold-blooded murderer? Julio, I'm letting you back, but behave. I ain't playing anymore. Yes, Janie, you're right. Hey, Tom. Yeah, respectfully. But I know I've judged her too on the video, and she is being crazy outside the video where she's like, I'm gonna break the fucking door. We get it. We get it. Okay. It's very intense. But I think there's a lot to this relationship, and it takes two to tango, and I should have never just been one-sided, because it does take two, and we do see that also throughout the text messages. We will continue those. I've just been busy reviewing other stuff. But that video doesn't make Mackenzie a murderer. But let's move on. And he is here saying that he doesn't know who the primary aggressor is in the video with Dom. Well, if the police can't figure it out and the court doesn't have it and he's saying it, then even though intense, we don't know what transpired before the recording. Exactly, Juvenated Creations. Thank you for being here, love. We don't know. Just like we don't know what happened that day when, oh, Kenzie's going to crash the car. We don't know. That's hearsay. Is Chris Hench a credible person? I think not, but we don't know that for sure yet. We just know he's heavily involved with the Russos. Who's ever been with a narcissist knows what I'm getting at. Yeah. Let's continue. He says, no, I don't know who the primary aggressor is. Troop says, would you agree with me? The court says, was your answer no? The witness says, no, no. The court says, okay. Troop says, would you agree with me? One person is talking more calmly than the other. Jesus says, yes. Troop says, would you agree that one person is threatening to cause property damage to another person? Jesus says, yes. Troop says, okay, why didn't you read Mackenzie her rights when you went to the hospital? Jesus says, she was not in custody. She was not being interrogated. I don't believe Zaki Jesus there when he says that. I never believed the hench quote, too convenient. Her actions, so what? She's not allowed to be a toxic person because I bet some of you have been toxic people. She threatened to crash the car when? From hench, I don't buy it. Being a toxic girlfriend, although it was abusive, yeah, but that goes on both ends. Let's not disregard the text messages of hurting animals and banging your head against walls and etc. There was definitely something going on here on both ends, whether people want to agree or not. You know damn well that it's a two-way street. She says, she was not in custody. She was not being interrogated. Troop says, you testified that you couldn't decide whether this was a suicide or homicide, correct? Jesus says, that is correct. Troop says, okay, based on a person driving a car into a brick building at speeds around 100 miles per hour with a foot on the gas pedal the entire time, no attempt to touch the brake. In your mind, does it matter? He says, no, it doesn't. Troop says, you were asked about progress. You testified that this wasn't your beat, right? Progress wasn't your beat. Jesus says, no, it wasn't. Not for 8 years, it wasn't. No. Troop says, okay, but you were asked questions about, was it a cut through, something to that effect? Do you recall that? He says, yes. Troop says, okay, as part of your investigation, did you learn if Mackenzie Shirilla was familiar with progress? He says, yes. Troop says, okay, how did you learn that? Jesus says, 2 ways. Number 1 was data extract from her cell phone, which showed the phone pinging at that intersection 7 times, with the last being on July 28th of 2022. And I don't recall the time. And Mr. Landon Turner, when I interviewed him, mentioned that I believe it was homecoming or some graduation or some event where they did drive down that area. It could have been Landon Turner, but it was also Miss Russo. Miss Russo, in her police interrogation, says that they're all very familiar with that route. The mom, I mean. And I believe that. I don't think this is relevant. Her driving by that route doesn't make her a murderer. If so, then I should have been arrested yesterday when I went to visit my parents. And I drove the same way that I drove when I was in high school, respectfully. Just Pepper, that's your opinion, and you can have that. So what, Alicia? Doesn't mean that their past gets erased. We are who we are, and it is what it is. It's in police documents. It's fair game. I feel like he only stayed with her out of fear she would snitch on him. I thought that for a long time, but it's 4 years. That's a long time. And his mom is in the legal field. They could have definitely found a way to get Kenzie the fuck away from Dom. Should the Shirillas have done that too? Yes. Should they have been like, I know there's something wrong with her and they're obsessed with each other. She's obsessed with Dom. Should I maybe pull her away? Yeah, maybe they should have. Doesn't make any of them murderers. Makes everyone human. Troop says, okay, there are some questions about a photograph that was sent earlier in the evening. Do you recall that? Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, okay, I'm showing you States Exhibit 1 and Exhibit 2. Do you recognize States Exhibit 1? Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, okay, what is it? He says, sir, this is a social media message exchange between Mr. Davion and the person who was identified later as Tyler Croy at the time. Troop says, are there timestamps on these various communications back and forth between Tyler and Davion? Jesus says, yes, sir, on the right, but I can't see them. Troop says, could you step down, please? could just start at the top. The first communication is what time? Jesus says, it's set. It looks like 4:06 a.m. Chip says, okay, and who is making the communication? He said, Mr. Flanagan sent out a message. Chip says, what does it say? Flanagan said, or Jesus said that Flanagan said, what are you doing? Chip says, do you know what WYD means? Jesus says, what are you doing? Chip says, okay, this message is at what time? Jesus says, it's at 4:12 a.m. Chip says, okay, and who is me in red? Jesus says, me is Mr. Tyler Croy. Chip says, what does Tyler Croy send at 4:12 a.m.? Jesus says, showing in the mountains, you see, and then it says inaudible, this shit's so fucking hard. Chip says, okay, and there's a photograph, correct? Jesus says, yes. Chip says, okay, so that was sent to Davion at 4:12? Jesus says, yes. Interesting. Chip says, where was Davion at 4:12 a.m.? Jesus says, at Paul's house. Chip says, okay, so he wasn't leaning over the seat of the car showing people a photograph? Jesus says, no. How do you know? Jesus, were you there? Was there a camera? Jesus says, no. Chip says, okay, at what point then does Davion respond to the 4:12 photograph? He says at 5:31 a.m. Chip says, okay, what's he say? Jesus says, damn, WTF. The rest is inaudible. Chip says, okay, that's all I have to ask you about 102. Thank you, detective. How many times have you driven down Progress Drive? He says, hundreds, if not more. Chip says, all right, it's right down the hill from the police station. Ah. Jesus says, yes. So if, like people allege that Kenzie drove by past that route to murder Dom and plan it out, if it's down the hill from the police station and they were trying to avoid police, why would they go down that road? You would think they would be trying to go a different route. It's right down the hill from the police station. I guess I have to see what right down the hill means. Because like the Rosie thing, it could have not even been relevant. I have never heard Kenzie say she is not innocent. She has said that. This is the part I'm most interested in, Davion's timeline. Yeah. It's down the hill from the police station. Jesus says yes. Okay. So she drove it to get away from police, like we thought. Why would they drive by down the hill? Why would they drive by the police station? I guess I would need the exact. Let's see if I can find it online real quick. Wow. It's 4 minutes. But again, they could have just been driving a normal route. So maybe 4 minutes, maybe it doesn't mean anything like I thought. He says, have you driven it at high speed? Jesus says, yes. Chip says, okay, what's the highest speed you've driven down? Jesus says 79 to 80. Wait, is Jesus telling on himself here? Is he self-snitching? He's driven on Progress Road 80 miles per hour. Wow. It's very honest. While he's testifying too. He says 79 to 80. Troop says, were you able to maintain your car at that speed? He says, not pedal to the metal. That was last night. We don't know why Kenzie was going at that speed. Truly, we can assume that she's a bully from her text messages. But I mean, Jesus even saying here, you're not able to maintain the car at speed. He says, no, not pedal to the metal. Chip says, you also had training as a driver. Jesus says, yes, we have to go through basic driver courses and then advanced emergency vehicle operations pursuit driving. But I would like to just add, Troop says, no, thank you. Just wait for a question, please. Troop says, one moment, Your Honor. The court says, sure. Troop says, I'm going to play just a few seconds of States Exhibit 33. This is a dash cam. I'm only going to play it from the perspective of Progress Drive, not the ultimate crash site. I just want to show the road conditions that are on that. And there's a video playing. Troop says, Detective, I wanted to point out and ask you if you noticed the various light poles and their position on the side of the street here. Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, how far down these light poles go that are along the side of the street? Do they go all the way down to the end? Jesus says, I believe so. I gotta see it. It's not something I noticed. Yeah. Troop says, there appears to be a lot of light poles along. Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, this car was operated and controlled through this, was it not? Jesus says, yes, sir. The court says, you're referring to the driver of this vehicle in the exhibit? Mr. Troop says, that's correct. Thank you. No further questions. The court says, any recross? McDonald says, no, Your Honor. The court says, can I please see state exhibit, the coroner's report? Mr. Troop says, 41 and 42. The court says 41 and 42, Detective, on exhibits 41 and 42, where is the inaudible? It says inaudible info. The witness says, Your Honor, it was the page that Mr. McDonald. The court says, I understand. So isn't the full medical examiner's report, correct? The witness says, no, Your Honor. Why? The court says, okay, this is only like the cover sheet of it, right? The witness says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, and normally there's multiple pages. The Jesus says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, so at what point did you learn? Because I know the prosecutor had asked you what the date was on here. It's dated August 1st of 2022, correct? Jesus says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, so at what point did you learn that the medical examiner ruled it to be accidental? Jesus says, when I received the report, Your Honor, the day he conducted the autopsy is not the date I received the report. I would have to look at my timeline to tell you exactly when they emailed that to me. The court says, okay. Jesus says, okay, there's at least a few weeks, if not longer. I can tell you. The court says, thank you. Do you recall if the documentation provided to you from the medical examiner's office that ruled it to be accidental was dated as the same day as those two documents, 41 and 42? Jesus says, I would have to look, Your Honor, but it was one document, one PDF file per decedent. The court says, sure, but you don't recall if this portion of the document was just dated August 1st, the day that the body was examined, right? Was August 1st. Is that what this is saying? You don't know what date the medical examiner officially ruled it to be an accident? He says, I don't. What do you mean you don't, Zaki Hazu? You're the main detective. You should know this. This is a problem. He says, I don't know, and I won't testify to this more times than I've lost track. What the fuck? If I commit a crime, the main detective on that case better know all the dates, all the times, everything. Cause like you're the main investigator and you let her be out free for 3 months and you still couldn't get it right. I'm horrified. He doesn't even know when it was ruled an accident. He just wanted to change it to a homicide. The court says, okay, after you received that information, you reached out to the prosecutors, correct? He says, I did. The court says, okay, and I know there was a lot of questioning about that. Did you ever send, based on learning that they ruled it to be accidental, did you ever send any additional information back to the medical examiner's office and ask them to consider that in making their ruling? He says, no, Your Honor, I sought guidance from the prosecutor. Ah, I'm catching on now. Got it. The court says, so this official ruling still stands as accidental. He says, yes, Your Honor. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. People influenced detectives and the prosecutor. Wonder who that was. Wonder who has that type of pull. Hmm? Hmm? That's crazy. They made her a murderer because of the text messages and videos. Dirty. Dirty work here. So the official ruling still stands as accidental. Who has pull? You tell me. Dom's mom knew exactly what she could do about Dom, though. Dom has been involved with the police very heavily. So it wasn't just that the Shirillas missed and didn't help Kenzie. It goes both ways. No, we can agree to disagree. That was a very codependent relationship, very toxic. The outcome is very sad, but I'm still on the fence. He says, "Yes, Your Honor." The court says, "Got it. Thank you." Anything based on that behalf of the state? Troop says, "No, Your Honor." The court says, "McDonald." Mr. McDonald says, "Yes, Your Honor." Now, McDonald goes back, recross. He says, McDonald says, "Do you know why the prosecutors only handed you page one, the report of the autopsy that was dated August 1st? The court says, "But to be clear, it's not dated August 1st. The examination of the body was done on August 1st, right?" McDonald says, "Right." Why didn't he include that 4 pages that has a date of September 12th, 2022? I want the record to reflect that. And then it says accidental, correct? Jesus says, "If I may look, I can." Mr. McDonald says, "Do you follow where I'm coming from, Judge? Do I need to make it any clearer?" The court says, "I follow you." McDonald says, "Okay." Jesus says, "You are correct. This is dated 9/12." McDonald says, "Thank you." The court says, "Anything else, McDonald? Mr. McDonald?" McDonald says, "No, Your Honor." The court says, "Thank you so much. You can step down." So the state calls our next witness, which is Troop says, "Your Honor, we will call Dr. Fellow from the medical examiner's office." The court says, "Hi, doctor. Could you please come right around here?" Sure. Okay, being sworn in. Direct examination of Dr. Joseph Fellow. Troop says, "Good afternoon, doctor. Would you state your name? Okay. Where are you employed?" He says, "I am the chief deputy medical examiner and forensic pathologist for the, is it Cuyahoga? Whatever it is. I think it's Cuyahoga. I could be wrong. Pathologist for the Cuyahoga Medical County Examiner's Office here in Cleveland, Ohio." Troop, Troop says, "Okay, how long have you been employed in that position?" He says, "I've been a forensic pathologist for 25 and a half years with the county. At one time, we were the coroner's office, so I was deputy coroner and chief deputy coroner. Now that we're a medical examiner's office, I've been a deputy medical examiner and chief deputy medical examiner all at the same facility." Troop says, "Thank you." He says, "You're welcome." Troop says, "And in your role, is part of the role of the medical examiner's office to determine the cause and manner of death and when folks in the county are deceased?" He says, "Yes." Troop says, "Okay, and how do you go about making these determinations?" The doctor says, "The cause of death is a physiological process the body goes through that culminates or finishes with their demise. And so generally, we do that with either an autopsy or a medical record review. And sometimes we have to do an ancillary testing if there's no gross or with our naked eye appearance of what might cause someone to die. So the most common cause of death is going to be atherosclerotic heart disease. That's essentially a heart attack. I don't know if I said that right. There are thousands of, so I apologize. There are thousands of causes of death, and they can be anywhere from blunt trauma, sharp trauma, gunshot wounds, cancer, stroke, anything that ultimately leads to death. So we determine the cause of death generally based on examining the body one way or the other. Manner of death is based primarily on the circumstance surrounding the individual's death, and we rely on the manner of death primarily with the investigation of the law enforcement. And when we correlate these findings with our autopsy findings in order to determine the manner of death. Whereas there's thousands of causes of death, there's only 5 manners of death, and they include naturals, which are going to be where someone dies from a biological process, such as a heart attack or cancer. Suicide is when someone takes their own life. An accident is when a death is caused by something that is unpredictable or unknowable at the time. A homicide is when someone takes someone else's life, and undetermined is when it just doesn't quite fit into one category or another. And so we use undetermined as a rare potential manner of death. Chip says, okay, and are these causes of, I'm sorry, the 5 manners of death that you just described to the court, are these legal determinations that are made by medical examiner? The doctor says, no, they're medical determinations. Chip says, all right, at what point in the process, if someone is deceased, at what point is the cause and manner of death determined? Dr. Fellow says the cause of death is oftentimes determined closely at the time of autopsy or sooner after. And the manner of death will follow based on the information that comes into our office. So, generally, as I said, if it's blunt force trauma or something where we know with certainty that anyone would die with these types of injuries or natural diseases, we can determine the cause of death as we're doing the autopsy. Chip says, okay, now did you not perform an autopsy on either of the deceased people involved with the case? Is that correct? He says, I personally did not. Okay. So why are you here testifying? Okay, let's move on. I personally did not, correct? He says, okay, but are you able to shed some light on information? You're able to interpret information contained in the documents generated by the medical examiner's office? He says, yes. Why couldn't get why couldn't they get the person involved in this autopsy in there to testify? That's odd. Is that normal? I'll have to look it up. Remember, I'm doing research on the back as we go through these documents to find inconsistencies. So we'll probably have a live on that here soon. Did you change your view on Mackenzie? Because I did. Oh, Storm Dyer. I changed my view on what I think about the investigation and the entities, law enforcement, and thus those of the law. That's what I changed my mind on. But let's continue. They posted you on the Kenzie Shirilla page. Did they? That's very nice. I support anyone who supports me. I changed my mind for sure. Cynthia, did I influence you in changing your mind? I hope not. I hope you came to that opinion on your own. But if I did, thank you. Thank you for standing up for what's right. So many people testifying and not sure what they're testifying about. Melissa says, I see the evil from both sides now. I'm surprised you didn't see it. I did. I did see it. I'm just being a smartass. We can talk about that on the members only. Why will I make it members only? Because I can, respectfully. If you change your view again, we're gonna have issues. No, listen, I am not knocking that Kenzie Shirilla. We can talk about this on the members only. Like I already said, I'm not knocking anything, but I did come out publicly and apologize to the parents because although I don't agree with them on a lot of things, they probably don't agree with. We all don't agree with a lot of things and how we were raised in our family. Don't even get me started on that. Like we can sit here for 24 hours straight and talk about our family issues, our family dynamics, problems, fights, growing up as children, growing up in families where a lot of taboo. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm feeling? You know what I'm saying? Fair trial. She deserves it, hands down. It's just really a situation that is so compelling from all sides. We're emotional. I'm deep into this. But even though I'm deep into a case, I will always stand up for what's right, or at least try to. I have been in the system before. I've made mistakes. I know what it's like to come from a very traumatic background. And I know also what it's like to make very detrimental mistakes. And I also know what rehabilitation is like. all the way across the board, mental, physical, all the way. And I also know what it's like to make mistakes and not be that same person. And I also know that who we are today does define who we are today, if you get what I'm saying. So our behavior does matter in present time. And I'm not, that's all I'm saying. I agree. We see all the filters of what we have lived through. Melly, you have risen from that. Thank you, Melissa. From the ashes, much like the smelly right here. It's just really a situation. That's fine. My brain has associated your voice with Mackenzie now. Melly got paid by the Shirillas. Art, get off of here with your troll account. I did not get paid off by the Shirillas. Why? That is hilarious. First of all, I think they filed bankruptcy because if I'm not mistaken, I have the document. Second of all, why would you even think I would take money from someone? I ain't taking money from no one unless it's one, the sugar daddy that I don't have, two, my actual dad. Facts. And I don't need any more money. I am not that kind of person. I'm fine with what I have, honestly. That is funny that you think that I got paid off by the Shirillas. Shout out to the Shirillas. Where's my check? Where is my check? Can I get paid too? Dude. No, I didn't get paid off by the Shirillas, respectfully. Art Vandalay. Come in here with your real name and then ask me that. That's hilarious. I'm literally like dying on the inside. Okay, Chip says, okay, but you're able to shed some light on information. You're also able to interpret. He says, okay, Chip says, I'm going to first, if I may, approach the witness, Your Honor. Hand you States Exhibit 41 and 03. The court says, thank you. Chip says, doctor, would you please identify 41 and 103 to the court? The doctor says, States Exhibit 41 is a one-page document that is known as a medical examiner's verdict regarding the death of Dominic Anthony Russo. This is a one-page document that summarizes the investigation and the circumstances surrounding this individual's death, and it is signed by the medical examiner, Dr. Thomas Gilson. The States Exhibit 103 is a four-page document regarding the death of Dominic Anthony Russo, and this is a one-page summary of the autopsy finding, followed by 3 pages describing what Dr. Galita, who did the autopsy, saw at the time of the autopsy. This summary page will have all of the blunt force trauma that led to the individual's death and is signed by both Dr. Galita and Dr. Gilson. The final page of States Exhibit 103 was a date when Dr. Galita finished his report, and that is October 12th of 2022. Troop says, okay, are you able to tell from looking at the document if the date that Dr. Galita finished the report is the same date that he conducted the autopsy? He says, I can tell. The autopsy was done on the 1st of August, 2022, and the report was finalized October 12th, 2022. Troop says, and do both of the documents bear the cause and manner of death? He says, yes. Troop says, what are they on each exhibit? Dr. Fellow says, the cause of death is listed as blunt force impacts to head, trunk, extremities with skeletal, visceral, and soft tissue injuries, and the manner of death is listed as auto-fixed objects in accident. Passenger. That means that this is a traffic accident or traffic fatality in which he was a passenger of a vehicle that struck more than one fixed object. Troop says, okay, thank you. Jesus says, sure. Troop says, handing you 42 and 104, would you identify those, please? He says, State Exhibit 42 is the medical examiner's verdict regarding the death of Davion. It is a one-page document that summarizes circumstances surrounding this individual's death. And this document is signed by the medical examiner, Dr. Thomas Gilson. States Exhibit 104 is a 5-page document reporting regarding the death of Davion Flanagan, and this consists of a one-page summary of the autopsy findings that are signed by the autopsy pathologist, Dr. Todd Barr, as well as a medical examiner, Dr. Gilson. And then the next 4 pages is a specific description of what Dr. Barr found while he was performing the autopsy. Dr. Barr completed this report and signed and dated the last page of September 12th, 2022. Troop says, all right, are you able to tell when Dr. Barr conducted the autopsy? Jesus says, yes, he conducted the autopsy on August 1st, 2022. Troop says, do exhibits 42 and 104 bear a cause of manner of death for Davion Flanagan? He says, yes, they do. Jesus says, or Troop says, what are they? Jesus says, they're the same, and it lists cause of death as multiple blunt force injuries. The manner of death is auto-fixed objects accident, passenger. Troop says, and again, the manner of death is a medical determination, not a legal determination. Is that your testimony? He says, yes. Troop says, and are those cause and manners of death, are those rulings made based on the information available to the medical examiner at the time of the autopsy? He says, both at the time of the autopsy and the completion of our reports. Troop says, okay, thank you. Troop says, one moment, please, Your Honor. The court says, sure. Troop says, all right, I have no further questions. McDonald says, no questions. Troop says, thank you. The witness says, thank you. The court says, prior to making a decision of the manner of death, are the forensic pathologists provided with like police reports or crime scene photos or any other investigative material by police officers and detectives? Jesus says, yes. Before a manner of death is initiated, we rely on police investigation records. And based on the verdict, which is a summary of where we got our information from, there is a document listed there of where the manner of death was determined. The court says, thank you. The witness says, sure. Anything based on that? Troop says, nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you. The state calls their next witness. Troop says, Your Honor, pending admission of the state's exhibit, we will rest. The court says, all right, let's go through the exhibits. Do you have them all in order? Do you have a running list of them? Troop says, I do, but it just went out the door with Miss Kupach. Kupach? Don't know. The court says, I have 1, 2, and 3 being the videos. McDonald says, no objection. The court says 1 being the right-handed turn from parole to progress, 2 being the Parma movers, and 3 being the video of the actual crash. Is that correct? Troop says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, okay, so no objection. I don't have 4 or 5. Did I miss that? Ms. Kupach says, no, we don't have 4 or 5. Troop says, we do. 4 was the map in an overview map that was shown to Google map that was shown to, well, a couple of witnesses. McDonald says, no objection. The court says, is that the one that you used in your opening statement, Tim? Tim Troop says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, got it. Okay. Tim Troop then says, and then 5 was a photograph. I don't think I showed 5. The court says, okay. 6 being the patient care report, I believe, from the Berea Fire Department. Ms. Kupach says, that's correct. McDonald says, no objection. The court says 7 and 8 are Mackenzie's medical record. Yes. McDonald says, no objection. The court says 9 being the crash data report. Troop says, yes, Your Honor. McDonald says, no objection. The court says 10 being the actual EDR analysis report. Troop says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, any objection? McDonald says, no. The court says, okay. 11, the accident reconstruction report. Troop says, yes, Your Honor. McDonald says, none. The court says 12, being the report from Mark Sargent from FEC. Troop says, yes, Your Honor. McDonald says, no objection. The court says, was there a 13? Troop says 13 was a Toyota recall report that was identified by Mark Sargent. McDonald says no objection. Troop says 14 was a Toyota service record. McDonald says no objection. The court says 15 through 31 being photos of the car that Mark Sargent took. Troop says correct. McDonald says no objection. 32, or the court says 32 being the video that Mark Sargent took of like the accelerator. Troop says yes, Your Honor. McDonald says no objection. The court says 50, sorry, wait, I'm just going in the order that I have. How were they introduced? 50 being the photo of the slipper. Ms. Kupach says that's correct. The court says, okay, so then 33 being the dash cam video of Patrolman Robinson arriving on the scene. Troop says yes. The court says, and then 34 being his body camera video of the same thing. Troop says correct. McDonald says no objection. The court says 35 being the Life 360 doc that came in on Mr. Flanagan. Troop says, right, 35 through 40. The court says through 40. McDonald says no objection. The court says, okay, 41 being Mr. Russo's verdict. Ms. Kupach says that's correct. The court says 42 being the verdict for Mr. Flanagan from the medical examiner's office. McDonald says no objection. The court says 43 being Mackenzie's BMV application for her ID, I believe. Troop says yes, Your Honor. McDonald says no objection. The court says 44, 45, 46 were all the different applications for her permit. Ms. Kupak says yes. Okay, 47 is a toxicology report. 48 through 67 are crime scene photos. The court says 68 and 69 being the videos that Dominic was taking inside the house when Mackenzie was outside the house. Troop says yes, Your Honor. The court says any objection, no objection. 70, there's no exhibit 70. Okay, 71. Troop says that was a lab report. The court says yes, I couldn't read my own writing from the medical examiner's office. Troop says yes, Your Honor. Ms. Kupak says about the mushrooms, yes. McDonald says no objection. The court says, oh, that's right. Okay, 72 being the bag of mushrooms. Troop says that's correct. 73 is the digital scale. 74 are photos of marijuana, which is 10 grams. Okay, so now we know how much. Troop says correct. 74 is also a photo of the 10 grams of Mary Jane. 75 is a picture of the GoFundMe for Mackenzie, which I don't get it. Why can't she make a GoFundMe and everyone else can? Um, Chip says, correct, Your Honor. The court says 76, that is an Instagram message where I think Mackenzie and her mom commented on. Chip says, yes, Your Honor, no objection. 77 through 81 are Halloween pictures. 83 and 91 are different photos of Mackenzie smoking Mary Jane. Okay, 92, there's no 92. 100 is, which 100, which was a report only used to refresh recollection, right? Kupak says, yes. Troop says, right. The court says that was used multiple times, but no one's moving to admit that, right? Troop says, no, Your Honor. The court says, okay, 101 being the still photo, I think taken from the body cam of the bodies in the car. Troop says, yes, Your Honor. Ms. Kupak says, that's correct. The court says, and 102 was a screenshot of the phone conversation that Mr. Flanagan had with the text message conversation and the photo of the sunset. Ms. Kupak says, that's correct. Troop says, yes, Your Honor. The court says 103 being an autopsy for Mr. Russo. Yes, 104 is the autopsy for Flanagan. And that is everything. Those all will be admitted into evidence. McDonald says, I do have witnesses. I'm ready to go. The court says, okay, you may call your first witness. You know, if you're putting all those on a flash drive before you turn them over, says the court, make sure that Mr. McDonald sees all of it so that nothing's coming back to me that wasn't introduced. The court says hi. The witness says hi. Hey, Shug. I'm over here reading. Sorry. Can you guys hold on a second? Let me grab my drink. I left it on the cable. Please hit the like button. Let me grab my. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I had to grab my drink because I'm reading. Oh, yeah. If you know, you know. If you don't, well, now you do. Okay. Yeah, we're going to be going over the update later today. Um, the Shirillas are bankrupt. Apparently not. Apparently they paid me $5.7 million to change my opinion. Okay, let's continue. I'm done being a smartass. Just kidding. No, they didn't. Will you please come around here? Okay, so this is a witness. Carrie Jankar. Hmm. This awkward silence. Hi, Jakey. Okay, so let's see. Carrie. The court says, okay, she got sworn in. Direct examination by Mr. McDonald, Kenzie's attorney. This will be interesting. 50 Cent filed bankruptcy too. I guess 50 Cent paid me too. 50 Cent paid me for some ass shaking. Just kidding. Okay. This is just for entertainment purposes. The documents are public information, but anyways, let's proceed. I thought it was 16 kids. Who? Oh yeah, Evie. We're gonna be covering that, so don't worry. Um, okay, Mr. McDonald says, would you please state your name and spell your record? Okay, what? Will you please state your name and spell your last name for the record? Carrie, are you employed? She says, yes, I own my own business, Family for Solutions. Damn, if 50 Cent paid you, then you must have been rolling, then you must be rolling in the dough. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, Artie, you know what, Artie? We had enough of your shit today. Um, Respectfully. Okay, let's continue. Hey, Chucks, good to see you, love. She says, yes. McDonald says, where? Carrie says, I already read that. Sorry. I own my own business. McDonald says, tell us a little bit about your educational background. She says, I have a bachelor's in social work and a master's from case in clinical social work. Troop says, have you testified in court before? She says, yes. Wait, not Troop, McDonald. Oh my God, I'm so used to Troop. McDonald says, how many times approximately? She says, 3. McDonald says, have you been qualified as an expert in each of those times? She says, yes. He says, okay. McDonald says, Your Honor, I move that she be, the court says, any objection? Tim Troop says, frankly, I don't know anything about the witness. I haven't been provided any credentials. I, I certainly won't stipulate to her qualifications. McDonald said, oh, that's interesting since you have her name in your reports. You go, McDonald. You shouldn't just sat on your ass. Anyways, the court says, are you objecting? Are you objecting? I'm not asking if you're stipulating, but whether you're objecting. Troop says, I'm objecting to her being called as an expert and giving expert opinions because I haven't been provided any credentials of a summary of anything. I don't have any information about this witness, Your Honors, besides the fact that I had some communications between her and Mackenzie. So you had communications that influenced you. Interesting. Okay. He says, I certainly would be legally way off base to just accept her coming here and saying she's an expert when I don't have anything. The court says, do you want to go through a little bit more? McDonald says, absolutely. The court says, none of their witnesses were declared experts. McDonald says, pardon? The court says, none of their witnesses were declared experts. They never asked for a single witness to be declared an expert. McDonald says, okay. The court says, go ahead. Wait. None of whose witnesses? Troops? The states? None are experts? Or does he mean that Troop never asked for them to be experts? The court says none of their witnesses were declared experts. McDonald says, pardon? The court says none of their witnesses were declared experts. They never asked for a single witness to be declared an expert. McDonald says, okay. The court says, go ahead. What? Hey, Lindsay Bay. Hey, Vacay. Hey, Joker. Yeah, it is. Interesting. Okay, let's continue. McDonald says, where did you go to college? She says, Carrie says, I went to Cleveland State for my bachelor's and I went to Case for my master's. McDonald says, what did you get your undergraduate degree in? She says, social work. McDonald says, and then you went where? She said, to Case Western. McDonald says, Mandel School of Applied Social Science. She says, mm-hmm. McDonald says, and did you graduate from there? She says, I did. McDonald says, did you receive a special degree from there? She says, I did. I got my MSASS, my clinical social work degree. McDonald said, is that from LISW? She says, yes. McDonald says, but first you got what? She says, my master's. McDonald says, okay, and what are the initials for the master's? She says, MSSA, Social Service Administration. McDonald says, and when you received that, were you licensed by the state of Ohio? She says, with an LSW, yes. McDonald says, and when you were licensed by the state of Ohio with an LSW, what did that allow you to do? Carrie says, that allowed me to do some clinical social work under now ISW. McDonald says, okay, who was your supervisor? She says, Dr. Akis was my supervisor. McDonald says, okay, and at that point you were able to make diagnosis? She says, yes, under his supervision. McDonald says, okay, and did you make diagnosis of patients? Carrie says, with support from her, yes. McDonald says, sure, and how long did that process take where you were just an LSW? She says, I went through a 2 years master program, and then you have clinical supervision for 12 months to get your LISW. McDonald says, okay, and what did you have to do to get your LISW? She says, I had to take an examination. I had to get, I think, about 30 hours of clinical supervision. McDonald says, for how long did you get 30 hours of clinical supervision? She says, 12 months. McDonald says, for 12 months, and then you said you had to take an exam? She says, mm-hmm. McDonald says, who gave the exam? She says, the state of Ohio. McDonald says, did you pass? She says, I did. McDonald says, and once you passed that exam, did you receive another license? She says, yes. McDonald says, and what license was that you received? She says, my independent clinical license. McDonald says, independent clinical license? She says, mm-hmm. McDonald says, what are the letters? She says, LISW. McDonald says, LISW meaning licensed independent social worker? She says, yes. McDonald says, once you became a licensed independent social worker, what did the state of Ohio allow you to do? She says, provide diagnosis without supervision. Ah, so that's where it changes. He says, okay. And she says, in mental health only. McDonald says, in mental health only? She says, yes. McDonald says, okay. And once you received your LISW, did you go somewhere? She says, yes. He says, where? Carrie says, I worked at Positive Education Program under my LISW for a time, and then I got a job at Nancy, Laurie, and Associates. McDonald says, how long a period of a time were you with PEP? Is it called? She says, PET, Positive Education Program. McDonald says, and where was that located? She says, there's lots of locations. I was at the one out in Grafton. McDonald says, okay, and what did your practice consist of when you were employed by PEP? She says, I did an individual and group therapy. McDonald says, okay, an individual therapy with people, right? She says, students. McDonald says, and groups would be with, and she says, students. McDonald says, okay, and during that time, you were able to make diagnosis? She says, yes. Once I got my LISW, McDonald says, were you able to treat people? She says, yes. McDonald says, did you keep notes? She says, yes. McDonald says, and how long were you there? She said, I was at PEP for probably 11 years, but not the whole time with my LISW. McDonald says, okay, how long were you there with your LISW? She says, 3.5 years. McDonald says, okay, and after that 3.5 years, what did you do? She says, I stayed home with my kids for about a year, and then I got hired by Nancy, Laurie, and Associates. McDonald says, and when you were hired by Nancy, Laurie, and Associates, and when, sorry, she says, in March of 2013. McDonald says, have you been employed continuously with them since then? Carrie says, yes, I recently, just in the last year, started my own practice doing the exact same thing. McDonald said, okay, so for 9 years, then you worked with them. She says, that's correct. McDonald says, when you were there, did you have an opportunity to consult with colleagues on cases? She says, yes. McDonald says, were you still doing this the entire time up until today, licensed by the state of Ohio? She says, yes. McDonald says, do you have to take a test every 2 years? She says, I have to do CE continuing education credits and multiple tests every 2 years for each of the courses. McDonald says, okay, and have you always every 2 years received a subsequent license from the state of Ohio? She says, yes. McDonald says, okay, have you testified in court before? She says, yes. McDonald says, how many times have you testified? She says, this is my third time. McDonald said, and the first two, what courtrooms were you testifying? She says, I was subpoenaed for custody related issues. McDonald said, okay, and do you know what court you testified? She says, I don't. It wasn't a big courtroom like this. It was just with attorneys. McDonald says, okay, and were you a qualified as an expert then? She says, I don't think I qualified as an expert, but they took my testimony. I don't think they asked me if I was an expert. McDonald says, okay. Your Honor, I would ask that she now be qualified as an expert. The court says, in the field of, McDonald says, licensed independent social worker providing therapy. Any objection? Troop says, no objection. The court says, all right, I will declare you as an expert and you can testify as such in accordance with the rules of evidence. McDonald says, all right, thank you. The court says, you may proceed. McDonald asks, do you know Mackenzie Shirilla? Carrie says, I do. How long have you known her? She says, I met Mackenzie in January of 2020. McDonald says, and the circumstances surrounding your meeting with her? Carrie says, she was referred because she was having some difficulties at Strongsville High School. McDonald said, Strongsville High School referred her to you. She says, that's correct. McDonald says, and then you saw her for what period of time? Carrie says, January 16th, 2020 was the first time we met. And then her last session was on February 2nd of 2022 because she ended up going online. So she wasn't coming in person to the high school any longer. McDonald said, and so to be clear, from February 1st to July 31st of 2022, you did not see her. Carrie says, February 2nd was her last time we met. That's an interesting date range because that's kind of like the text messages we have. I think they started in 2022 and 2020. And then now, if you're freezing, Evie, maybe refresh. Is the audio and visuals good? Let me know. Interesting. Yeah. I know. Melly, give us a closing argument. You be the judge. We are the jury. Time for a mock retrial. Take a poll just for shits and giggles. Shug, that's funny. It's my end. Okay, thank you. Let's see. Let's continue. This is interesting. Very interesting. And the time that the bindover was filed does matter to the appeal. And when we do our update, we're going to talk about this. But let's continue. She says, so she knew Kenzie for about 2 years. Excuse me. Let me take a drink. Okay. So she says February 2nd was her last time we met. McDonald says, okay. And from then on, you never saw her? She says, that is correct. McDonald says, approximately how many times did you see her? Carrie says, she would informally come down sometimes when she was in crisis. She did sessions usually about once every 2 weeks. McDonald says, okay. Carrie says, sometimes it was spread out. It wasn't always consistent. McDonald said, could you give an estimate of how many times total you saw her, just to the best of your ability? She says, I mean, that's hard to give an estimate. Probably around, I would guess, formal sessions, around 30. McDonald says, okay. Informal sessions? She says, probably maybe in crisis coming down. Maybe 11 or 12. McDonald says, okay. And did there come a time when you made a diagnosis? She says, yes. McDonald said, what was that diagnosis? Carrie says she was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. And then we added DMDD, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder later on. I do agree with this. We can talk about this maybe later in the members only or in the update. But this is very interesting. And I'm not a mental health professional. Um, but that's interesting. We already knew that though from the detective report. McDonald says, okay, the first diagnosis was what again? Generalized anxiety disorder. McDonald says, describe what that is. Carrie says, it's when someone has generalized anxiety, nervousness in different situations. Hers was mostly social anxiety and school based performance anxiety. We could see that too in the text messages. She struggled in school. She would pay people to do her schoolwork. And remember, her and her friends too. Interesting. McDonald says, okay. And the second diagnosis you ultimately made, she says, as I kind of got to know Mackenzie more, the school and I noticed she was having more difficulty managing mood, using healthy coping skills. So I added the diagnosis of DMDD. McDonald says, and what are, she says, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. McDonald says, and what are some of the symptoms from some of your experiences with that? She says a lot of moodiness, a lot of outburst that don't seem to match that trigger. The trigger, irrational thinking, sometimes irrational impulsive behaviors. Yeah, this is very interesting. Yeah, place at the lake. She says irrational impulsive behaviors. McDonald says, what does irrational impulsive behavior mean? Carrie says, irrational means it's not typical. It's not a typical response or typical way of thinking about situations and events. Impulsive means acting without thinking. McDonald says, means what? Carrie says, acting out with thinking first, like not thinking about what you're doing and what's going to happen as a result. McDonald says, and you made that diagnosis, correct? She says, yes. McDonald said, okay, let's switch to the subject of suicide. If a person is suicidal, do you have any responsibilities? Carrie, the expert, says, yes, I have to report that. McDonald says, and you report that to who? She says, if they're a minor, I have to report it to their parents, and I have to make sure that the parent follows through appropriately with supervision, possibly hospitalization. McDonald says, okay. And you said that's under the circumstance of, you used a word I can't remember. She says, I'm a mandated reporter? Question mark. McDonald says, you're a mandated reporter. And then the first thing you report it to the parents? She says, if it's a minor, correct. McDonald said, if it's a minor. Carrie says, if the child's, McDonald said, so what if it's something other than a minor? What do you have to do? She says, if they're an adult, question mark. McDonald says, no. If they're juvenile and it's not a minor issue, what do you do? She says, oh no. I said, if the person is a minor, meaning if they're a juvenile. McDonald says, got it. Carrie says, yes. McDonald said, so if you saw any suicidal tendencies, you would have to report the minor's tendencies to the parent. Carrie says, that is correct. McDonald says, did you ever do that in this particular case? She says, no. McDonald says, did you ever make a diagnosis that she was suicidal? She says, no. Did she ever discuss suicide with you? The expert says no. McDonald says no further questions. The court says any cross examination. And Troop says, yes, Your Honor. Now here's a cross examination with Troop. Shug, thank you, Shug. You're so sweet. Just to hear you say one more time, "Shut up, Kenzie. Nobody cares. I miss those days. Haha, love you, Millie." I know. We're gonna go back to those days though, Shug, when we review text again or continue. But I appreciate you. Thank you for the super. You're awesome. Okay, Troop says, "Hi, my name's Troop. How are you?" She says, "Hi, I'm okay, thank you." Troop says, "I'm with the county prosecutor's office. I just have a few questions. My first question is to give us a definition of the diagnosis of DMDD. I didn't catch exactly what that diagnosis meant." She says it basically means that someone has a really hard time managing their moods. It's usually given to someone who's under the age of 18. Moodiness, impulsive behaviors, irritability. This is typical tearfulness and outburst. Troop says, "And you told Mr. McDonald outbursts that don't match the trigger?" She says, "Yes." Troop says, "Would that be overreaction to something?" The expert says, "Yes." Troop says, "Okay, low tolerance to irritation. Is that a symptom?" The expert says, "Yes." Troop says, "And when is it that you diagnosed Mackenzie with DMDD?" The expert says, "We added that. I would have to look, but I would believe it was back in February of 2021." Troop says, "And DMDD can involve violent outburst of temper, correct?" She says, "Yes, it can." Troop says, "And extreme reactions to minor stimulus?" The expert says, "Yes." Troop says, "And Mackenzie was not very happy with you for diagnosing her with DMDD and telling her mother about it, was she?" The expert says, "Possibly." Troop says, "Well, you maintained regular contact with Mackenzie, did you not?" The expert says, "We did." Troop says, "Through text messages?" She says, "Sometimes, yes." Troop says, "Well, sometimes you would text her at all times of the day and night." She says, "If it was a crisis situation, I would respond to her." So many people around Kenzie, but here she is talking to a mental health professional. Very sad. Very sad. Mm, she says, "If it was a crisis situation, I would respond to her." Troop says, "Okay, Mackenzie told you that she was living with her boyfriend, Dominic, correct?" The expert says, "Correct." "Okay," he says. The expert says, "Or staying there, I believe." Troop says, "She didn't tell you that she actually lives with Dominic?" The expert, Carrie, says, "I don't remember." Troop says, "Okay, but you're aware that she was staying at the same house with Dominic?" She says, "Yes." Troop says, "How long were you aware of that?" She says, "I don't recall." Troop says, "Okay, but you've been treating her since January of 2020. She says, "No, I haven't been treating her since no, I haven't been treating her since February of 2022. Troop says, "Okay, I wrote down the date, January 16th of 2020. She says, "That was the first time I met Mackenzie." Troop says, "That's the first time you met her?" She says, "Yes." Troop says, "Okay, when did you begin treating her?" She says, "Well, that was her intake. That was the date of her intake." Troop says, "So you treated her for approximately 2 years?" The expert says, "On and off, yes." Troop says, "Okay, and during that time, you learned about the volatile relationship she had with her boyfriend?" The expert says, "Yes." Troop says, "Okay, and you had conversations about it?" She says, "Yeah." Troop says, "Did she tell you about a previous incident where police responded because she was threatening unaliving herself?" She says, "I don't recall that, no." Tim says, "Do you recall her discussing a road rage incident that she was involved with?" The expert says, "Which the police came?" Trip says, "Yes." She says, "I recall the police coming because of a situation. Yeah. I don't know that she was driving in that situation. I don't remember all the details." Troop says, "You diagnosed her with this DMDD because you saw symptoms of this." She says, "Yes, I did. And the school did." Troop says, "Okay, what symptoms did you see that caused you to give this diagnosis?" She says, "She was leaving the classroom without permission. She was slamming things around. She was having conflict with other students and other teachers that were atypical for students at Strongsville and that class." Troop says, would somebody key somebody's car in response to not being allowed in the house to be an example of someone with DMDD? And she says, yes, it could be. Whoa. Interesting. I'm checking in with you guys in the comments. Who lied? Yeah, beautifully broken. I know she lied when she was defending Makilla as well. She said she or her dad dropped her at a concert, then the cousin took her. Anyone catch that? Yeah, we caught that. Hmm. Troop says, would somebody keys? Oh, I already read that. She says it could be yes. Troop says, okay. Troop says, no further questions, Your Honor. The court says, any redirect? McDonald says, no, Your Honor. The court says, thank you so much for being here. So now it says, you're free to go. Do you have any other witnesses? McDonald says, yes, we do. This young lady right here. The court says, can you please come over, right over this, right around here by the seat over here? So this next witness is named Candace. Direct examination of Candace by Mr. McDonald. Mr. McDonald says, ma'am, would you please state your name and spell your last name? Candace, are you married or single? She says, married. McDonald says, okay, is your husband here today? She says, no, he is not. McDonald says, do you have any children? She says, I do. McDonald said, and the names of your children? She says, Tommy and Kelly. Okay, do you know Mr. and Mrs. Shirilla in the back here? Candace says, I do. Wait, okay. McDonald says, and what's your relationship to Steve and Natalie? She says, that's my niece and my nephew. McDonald says, okay, are you close with them? She says, yes. McDonald says, where do you live now? She says, I live in Strongsville. McDonald says, how long have you lived here? She says, a year. McDonald says, before that, where did you live? She says, Florida. McDonald says, how long did you live in Florida? She says, 19 years. Why did you move up here? She responds with, to be with family. McDonald said, okay, and you know Mackenzie, right? She says, I do. McDonald says, and would you see her often? She says, when we first moved here, she came with her mother, and then 3 times she came to the house with Dom. McDonald says, okay, to your house in Florida? She says, to my house here. McDonald says, to your house here. So did they ever come to Florida to visit? Candace says, no. McDonald said, so you've seen Dominic and Mackenzie together how many times? She says 3. McDonald says, okay, and most recent time you saw them together was when? She says, Thursday, before the accident. Wow. McDonald says, okay, and how is it that you remember that? She says, I remember it because it was a most unbelievable conversation. McDonald said, where did this meeting take place? She says, at my house. McDonald says, how did they arrive? She says, they drove. McDonald said, was there any particular reason they were at your house? She says, Candace says, she loves the house and she loves my puppies. So what I was going to do, I was going to have her be my dog sitter because I trusted her so much with my dogs. Her love of animals is unbelievable. So we were trying to get her used to the dogs because my husband and I had a trip planned. We were trying to get her comfortable with the house and she was trying to get my diet under control. McDonald says, how long did they stay at the house? She says, they stayed at the house 3 hours. McDonald says, was anyone else present besides you and the 2 of them? She says, my husband. McDonald says, okay, and did the 4 of you engage in conversation? She says, we did. McDonald says, okay, were there any arguments between? She says, oh, no. McDonald says, pardon? She says, no, absolutely not. McDonald says, but you hadn't been around them that much to know whether there were times they did argue, right? She says, correct. McDonald said, but on this particular day, you spent how much time with them? How long She says, 3 hours. McDonald says, did you see anything unusual? Did you see anything unusual to you? She says, no, it was unbelievable. McDonald says, did it appear that the two of them got along together? She says, yes. That is so interesting because everyone in their life says they never saw them fight. And we saw them fight in text messages, but that just proves how little information that is. Like the text is one part of the relationship. We were not there. We feel like we know them, but we do not. And we feel like we could tell how their relationship was, but at the end of the day, we don't really know. We weren't friends with them. We don't know them. We weren't there. So there's that. Hey, Jen. And many friends have said that they didn't. Yes. No, this is a family member now inside the mind of Noel. Sorry. We did switch. Um she says, okay, so she says yes. They did get along. McDonald says, now you're a relative, right? She says, I am. McDonald says, okay, but you didn't come in here to lie. You just came in to report about what happened. She says, I have no reason to lie. McDonald says, okay, you wouldn't, right? She says, no, I would not. McDonald says, okay, no further questions. The court says, any cross examination? Troop says, no, Your Honor. The court says, why did you describe the 3 hours they were there as unbelievable? Candace says, well, we talked about diet, we talked about food, we talked about things that are in your food. She downloaded an app for me so that I would eat better. She says, we talked about, that's really interesting. We talked about, I have never heard of this part before. We talked about their favorite restaurant, and we were supposed to go that Saturday to the restaurant, by the way. And we talked about God, and we talked about believing in God. And Mackenzie talked about modeling, and we were just laughing because Dom was saying, well, I guess I'll just have to take care of you. And I'm like, we were laughing so hard because it was such a cute conversation with two unbelievable kids. The court says, thank you. Anything based on that? McDonald says, no, Your Honor. Troop says, no, Your Honor. The court says, thank you so much for being here, and you can step down. The witness says, okay. The court says, if you wish, you are welcome to sit in the back of the courtroom for the remainder of the hearing. She says, thank you. McDonald says, we don't have any other witnesses. That's crazy to me. Why no experts? Kupak says, thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Your Honor, we just heard a lot of testimony from witnesses from both sides describing a lot of behaviors of Mackenzie and behaviors of Dominic and behaviors of friends. What happened this day? What happened that day? But my job this afternoon, Your Honor, is to bring the court back to the law, back to what the state of Ohio has to prove here in this hearing, and back to how the facts or the specific facts of this case match up with the law and what we have to prove. Counts 1 through 2 of the complaint, Your Honor, aggravated murder in violation of Ohio Revised Code 2903.01. No person shall purposely and with prior calculation and design cause the death of another or the unlawful termination of another's pregnancy. What did the state have to prove here? Purposely, prior calculation, and caused the death of another. Purposely, let's focus on that. A person acts purposely when it is in his specific intent to cause a certain result, or when the gist of the offense is a prohibition of conduct of a certain nature, regardless of what the offender intends to accomplish. Thereby, it is his specific intention to engage in conduct of that nature. And that's under the revised code, Your Honor. The elements of purpose may be presumed when the natural and probable consequences of an act are to produce death. Natural and probable consequences of an act are to produce death. Lastly, whether the defendant had a specific intent to kill is a fact-dependent inquiry, which can include, and then it says inaudible, the nature of the instrument used and the manner in which the wounds were inflicted. That's an 8th District Cuyahoga County case, Your Honor. Let's look at the facts here. Purposely, Mark Sargent testified this was on the state exhibit that we had to put on the screen, Your Honor, with this flip-flop wedged to the gas pedal. The state argues that this photograph is important to this case and so important that mens rea of purpose, so important to that mens rea of purposely. Mark Sargent quoted on the stand, this flip-flop, quote, not wedged before this incident, quote, surrounding components collapsed upon it. And that photograph is important, Your Honor, because it shows that Mackenzie Shirilla and only Mackenzie Shirilla had her foot with her shoe on the gas pedal, so much that even after the accident, when the car collided with the wall, that shoe was glued to the gas pedal, glued to the position where Mackenzie held her foot in those last moments. That is purposeful. That 100% application to the gas pedal that was always testified by Mark Sargent. No driver inputted brake application during any event associated with this collision. I believe we provided testimony both by Mr. McQuaid and by Mark Sargent that testified to this. That pedal was 100 metal that pedal was to the metal 100% of the way, and at no point in time was that foot removed to press that brake. There was testimony given that she was driving 97 to 98 miles per hour at that time she got to Parma Movers. Sergeant Mark Sargent quoted a fully loaded vehicle would have taken at least 18 to 20 seconds to get to that speed. So we're at 97 to 98 miles per hour at Parma Movers, but we have to travel back 18 to 20 seconds to even get to that speed. And lastly, Your Honor, our photograph down here, Mackenzie Shirilla had to drive straight into a giant sign with the building straight in front of her. We talk about that right turn. Defense counsel made multiple attempts to get witnesses to testify about the potholes that are on the scene. There were no potholes. We watched the video. Well, we know there was potholes. So I don't know why she's saying that. I think the detective testified the road was a little wobbly, but there were no potholes to avoid. There were multiple poles. The prosecutor should have questioned the detective about the poles on the road. While Miss Shirilla was driving, she had control of that vehicle. We don't know that. She had control of that vehicle. She knew what she was doing with that vehicle. She avoided every pole on that road until she got to that sign, which was a point of contact. She wanted to get there and she got there. Was there a right-handed turn made? The hard right, says the court. Ms. Kupak says right before the inaudible, Your Honor. The court says where? Ms. Kupak says, I don't know where exactly it was, but I think Mark Sargent testified that it was within seconds before the impact with the sign. I believe that's what he testified about. I would have to view it. I don't want to misquote him, but I believe it was within seconds prior to hitting the sign. What about the curb? Why aren't they including that in here that she hit the curb? And what about the rollover? The rollover event that deployed the airbags. Like, why aren't they including all of that in here? I don't understand. The court says, thank you. Ms. Kupak says, prior calculation to cause the death of another. The Ohio Supreme Court has upheld finding that the prior calculation and design in short duration situations. Prior calculation and design can be found even when a killer quickly conceived and executed a plan to kill within a few minutes, as long as the killer's actions went beyond a monetary impulse and it showed that they were determined to complete the specific course of action. Additionally, that's a law that says no time within which premeditation and deliberation must be had. The time can be a matter of seconds in a situation, such as to enable a person under circumstances, whatever they may be in a particular case, to turn over, to plan and execute in pursuance of that plan, a realization of what one was about to do. The court says, 1 second, please. She says, sure. The court says, thank you. Ms. Kupak says, Your Honor, that case law reflects the situation here. The time period that we're looking at, as the court has observed in the videos, was a short period of time. However, the state would argue that the prior calculation and design doesn't just start when she drives from progress or from parole onto progress at that time. It starts well before that in July of this year. We don't know that. And Hench isn't reliable. Hench is with the Russos and being bailed out of jail by the Russos. So Hench, that should have never even come into play, in my opinion, respectfully. Ms. Russo got $900 back for bailing Hench out of jail. I did show that in a previous live with the docket screenshot, but I'll have to find it maybe for tomorrow's live. She says, prior calculation and design. What reflects this factually based off of our case? First and foremost, I think it's important for prior calculation design, and the state argues this is one of our most important points. It is calculated safe when she makes a turn from Pearl Road onto Progress Drive right before proceeding into acceleration. I believe the court watched this video, but I'm going to play it again. This is July 31st at 5:34 a.m. I don't understand how she could have made that turn so perfectly if they were fighting or if she was about to kill them. I just don't see how that could have been a thing. Like, oh, la la la, nothing is happening, turning on my blinker. And then all of a sudden, like, she just decides, I'm going to kill them now. We don't know what happened in the car. That's actually a fact. We don't know what happened in that vehicle. The court can recall this as a potential vehicle. She does use her blinker. She does drive, according to the testimony of the detective, at an appropriate speed. She uses her blinker and she carefully turns on Progress Drive. Mark Sargent testified that it would take more than a quarter mile to get to the speed of 97 to 98 miles per hour. Why is that important for prior calculation? That's important, Your Honor, because there's time. There's time for Mackenzie Shirilla to decide how hard she's going to hit the pedal, how fast she's going to go. More than a quarter mile. That's a long time to plan something, to think about something, and to hold your pedal to the metal or have her check application again for beyond the quarter mile. For prior calculation and design, we have the July 17th incident. I know we had testimony about this, Your Honor, but the state wants to argue here. I think she should have a new trial, and let's bring Hench in, his charges, his involvement with the Russos, and then see if this incident qualifies as reliable or credible. Because I don't think it does, especially living under the Russo home. I just don't think it does. That's just my opinion. And I'm not shit talking anyone. I'm just saying, in my opinion, Hench is not a reliable source. We want to bring back the statement from Detective Hazoo that he spoke personally with Chris Martin, aka Hench. And what Hench heard that day on July 17th is Mackenzie Shirilla saying to Dominic, I will crash this car. I will crash this car. This is what the state argues, and this is what the testimony of Detective Hazoo stated, and this is what Christopher Martin, Mr. Hench, stated. The detective testified to Angela Russo's statement. Dominic wanted out of this relationship. He tried to end the relationship. He threatened to break up multiple times with her, and this was coupled with prosecutor Troop played videos corroborating the toxic nature of their relationship. The anger that Mackenzie had towards Dominic, quoting, if you don't let me in, I'll do what I said I would do. I'm going to make count to 10 or I'm going to break something. You have 30 seconds or I'm going to your car. These are threats. These are threats made by her. Why is this significant to prior calculation and design? This is significant because it goes to the fact that Mackenzie sought to harm Dominic. Mackenzie sought to put him in a situation began in July. They began July 17th. They didn't begin right on Progress Drive, and that's important. That's very important. Count 3 through 4, murder. No person shall purposely cause the death of another or the unlawful termination of another's pregnancy. We just went over purposefully and cause of death to another. Cause of death to another, Your Honor. The state of Ohio provided the death certificate. We provided photographs of the deceased to show probable cause that those individuals died. We also did put on an examiner, Dr. Fellow, who testified that he received the case, and with his specific case, shortly after receiving the initial police report, they did an autopsy on August 1st. They completed their reports at that time. Counts 5 through 6, murder. No person shall cause the death of another as an approximate result of the offender committing or attempting to commit an offense of violence that is a felony of the first or second degree and that is not a violation of section, et cetera, et cetera. Cause of death to another. Proximate results of committing or attempting to commit an offense of violence that is a felony of the first or second degree, specifically felonious assault. These are what we're looking at here in this count. What is the proximate result? The court has held that for criminal conduct to constitute the proximate cause of result, the conduct must have 1, cause the result in that, but for the conduct, the results would have not occurred, but for the conduct, the results would have not occurred. And number 2, the result must have been foreseeable. Foreseeability is determined from the perspective of whether the defendant knew or should have known when viewed in the light of ordinary experience. It is not necessary that a defendant was able to foresee the precise consequence of his conduct, only the consequences of foreseeable in the sense that what actually transpired, and then it says inaudible, and that it was within the scope of the risk created by the defendant. The scope of risk created by the defendant. Was it natural? Was it foreseeable that driving 97 miles per hour with your foot on the pedal to the metal into a brick wall was going to cause the death of two or three individuals? Yes, the state would argue yes. Well, I would argue no, respectfully, because we don't know what happened in the car. Yeah, she has anger issues, but we don't know. Okay, compare it to the Leah Mumby case. Can we please? I've been dying to say this. The Leah Mumby case, I covered it. Remember, it's the girl who drove the car into the brick or into the tree, and her boyfriend made it to the hospital and then he told on her. We Why I'm comparing it is because there was proof of her saying she was going to kill him before. Kenzie and Dom fought. I really, from all the review I'm doing off and on and off here on my channel, and whether I share it or not, I don't believe Kenzie was trying to unalive herself, and I don't believe she was trying to unalive Dom. I think that it was a very toxic relationship, but I truly think that they loved each other. Dom wouldn't, if he didn't love her, he wouldn't have been with her for 4 years, you guys. It's not just like 30 days, 1 year. It's 4 years. That's a long relationship for someone who is that young. Maybe not. Maybe that's just my opinion and what I've experienced. But I think that she was Dom's safe place and Dom was her safe place. I know that sounds sick because it was a toxic relationship. I don't think that she wanted to kill Dom intentionally. And I know a lot of you disagree, and that's okay. We can agree to disagree. There's so many things going on here, and we don't know what happened in the car, and neither does the state. We can sit and argue the whole slipper thing, the fighting, what happened at the house, is Bubba and Rosie lying? Like, it's all just things we talk about. We don't know anything, really. And I don't think she was like, this is it. This is the day I'm going to kill Dom. Like, I just really don't. Yes, Calissa Cat says I'm disgusted. Okay, well, yeah, both of these kids needed a lot of guidance, needed mental health help, and needed a lot of things that they were not provided. Um, and that happens to most of the population dealing with mental health issues. One, it's either a familial thing, or two, it's the resources we have. If I would have never, I've been into mental health since I was a teenager. I struggled like Kenzie as a teenager, which a lot of people say, like, why are you having a change of heart? And it's like, because you know what? I was kind of like that too. I was a rebel. I was causing trouble up until I was an adult. And I had the opportunity to become a better person and better myself on the record and off the record, if you know what I mean. And I just want to say that I don't think she got in that car and was like, I'm going to take Dom's life. Like, I really don't. I really don't. And I think they were both failed. Yes. And I think that mental health is such a struggle in itself. People don't understand it until you're actually like in it, if you know what I mean. Did you get help? I did. But it took a lot of things for me to get help. And I don't see that here on either side of the family, respectfully. And that doesn't make them criminals either. We are not God. We are not here to judge the parents. I know I have been doing it, but now that I'm seeing the bigger picture, it's like, okay, there was issues here, and not one of those parents should be held more accountable than the other. I think it's equal when you see all the police reports. And I just want to be mindful of that. I know people will get pissed and unsubscribe and say that I'm defending her. I'm not. I'm defending the whole thing of, like, I know what mental health is. I know what it's like to be on the other side. And I dealt with my parents who weren't comfortable with it. They're from Mexico. They didn't know English when they came here. Now they're retired and living their life as they should. With all the money in the world that they need, they're off doing their thing. And I'm just here talking about true crime. But like back in the day, it took almost my entire life for my parents to get accustomed to the mental health thing because they're from a different country, got brought up differently. They both were brought up in very abusive homes, in very poor homes, um, with parents that were alcoholic. And so, like, they, with me, they didn't know how to handle it. They really didn't. It took a lot of time for them to finally get it with professionals. And you're talking about someone who has the resources and the money to get the help. So imagine for someone who doesn't have those resources. So I just want to be mindful of the mental health thing and blaming the parents here. Like, sure, we shouldn't be blaming any one of them, but at the end of the day, we do, we're human, and that just sucks. But no one is in their lives to make that claim. I agree when people get mad, they do stupid stuff, but I also think she didn't want to unalive anyone. Yeah. And I know that's leading into the emotional part of it, and we're trying to like step away from that. And here I am talking about it. But it's like, I think there was issues there on both ends, and it makes me sad. Um, and then I think there was some kind of corruption, but we'll get into that later. So I just want to be mindful of that. I just want to recognize that. She says, yes, okay, the state would argue counts 7 through 10, felonious assault. No person shall do either of the following: cause serious physical harm to another or to another unborn, cause or attempt to cause physical harm to another by the use of a deadly weapon. If you're driving, the deadly weapon, the state would argue, would be the vehicle. Cause serious physical harm. In this case, we have that. Counts 11 through 12, aggravated vehicular homicide. No person while operating or participating in the operation of a motor vehicle, motorcycle, snowmobile, locomotive, witchcraft, or aircraft, or I'm sorry, watercraft or aircraft shall, not me saying witchcraft, shall cause the death of another or the unlawful termination of another's pregnancy in the following way: recklessly or as a proximate result of committing while operating or participating in the operation of a motor vehicle in a construction zone, a reckless operation offense provided in Section 5 only if the person whose death was caused, which pregnancy was terminated within a construction zone. And then it says inaudible. She says recklessly. A person who acts recklessly when with heedless indifference to the consequences. The person disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the person's conduct is likely to cause a certain result or is likely to be of certain nature. A person is reckless with respect to circumstances when the heedless indifference to the consequence, the person disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk. The state will argue that we have met more than that, but at least that. Count 14, drug possession. I don't even think this should be a charge. If the other person who was dealing isn't here to speak up, drop it. We know, I've said this many times before, Kenzie was not El Chapo here, okay? She was not El Chapo. Boo Boo says, if you flip it around and this was happening to your child, would we be okay with it? No, none of us would. I know. We have to take the emotion out of the situation and look at the facts. They did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and I hope she gets a retrial. There are many holes in this case, said Boo Boo. That is good, Melly. Thank you, Chucks. I truly believe she tried to play chicken and scared and lost control. If you guys put yourself in the place of that was my kid, wouldn't you want to know she had a fair trial? That's it. I could live with it if I knew it was fair. We all knew she crashed. Hey, Linto. Anastasia says, I believe she crashed the car on purpose, and I also believe she didn't get a fair trial. She should get a new trial. Thank you, Anastasia, and thank you for saying that in the chat. Thank you, because it shows your critical thinking skills here. And hello, free Mackenzie, Shirilla, good to see you. Also, Melly has morals. My girl Barbie in here in the chat, watch out. Maybe they should have charged all the additional charges, hoping to take the plea on them. I think the drug possession should be thrown out here, but we'll see. No person shall knowingly obtain, possess, or use controlled substances. There were multiple testimonies from, I believe, Captain Stanislaw and the detective mushrooms were found on Mackenzie's person, and there was marijuana tested that was found in her bag. Possession of criminal tools. We also had that testimony about the scale. Additional important info, just to recall and bring back some testimony so the court can recall statements by Mackenzie Shirilla herself. The detective testified that he went to the hospital to speak with Mackenzie. He can't remember if it's the first or second time that Mackenzie has made statement to Detective Hazoo, quote, "Can't you just take my license for 10 years or something?" Mackenzie also made a statement testified by the detective that Mackenzie told Christine Russo when asked, "Why didn't you just get a ride? He was fucked up." These statements are important. Can't you thank you, Melanie. I see you. Thank you for the gift. You're awesome. Thank you. She says, told Christine Russo when asked why didn't you get a ride? He was fucked up. These statements are important. Can't you just take the whole license for 10 years or something? The state would argue that shows guilt. No. Guilt would be like, can I get my lawyer? Also, I just don't think she knew. She does deserve a retrial, says Karen. I remember being 17 and driving recklessly, not even thinking we would crash or die. We would speed dark. Oh, girl, you do not want to know. Y'all want to know what trouble I was getting into? You can let me know. And we can talk about it in the members only. Melly's past. When Melly was a rebel, when Melly had mental health issues, when Melly was a drunk, when Melly did this, when Melly did that. Yeah, I'm far from perfect, but I've worked very hard to get where I am today. If you can't have nobody, nobody will, you are wrong. DSM borderline equals impossible separation. Interesting. Let's go on. She says the state would argue that shows guilt. According to medical records, Mackenzie Shirilla expressed that she felt, quote, guilty for killing her boyfriend. Yeah, she did in the hospital. Again, these words talk of guilt, not sorrow, not pain, guilt. No. How do you know that? From the medical record and the Brea Fire Department during my direct examination of both Captain Stanislaw and the doctor, their final conclusions were during their examinations of Mackenzie Shirilla, there were no signs present to show that a medical emergency caused the event. The court says they weren't declared experts. Troop says they were fact witnesses, Your Honor. The doctor testified to what was in the report. No mechanical or electrical deficiency caused this event. Everything was working normally as it would have been prior to the crash. That was testified by Mark Sargent. Why no experts? Like, I don't get it. They were. So you're not no more? Lean torero. That's funny. No, I'm still a crazy bee. I can't imagine the prosecution was offering less than 15 years for a total plea. I'm surprised I'm alive today, honestly, and I've used my past and choices as learning tools and how I teach and parent my children today. I'm very transparent and honest with them. I love that. Exactly, Millie. Something's off. Yeah, no. This smells like shit. Lastly important, the driver's license. Mackenzie Shirilla's driver's license is important because she applied not once, but twice, one very close in time after the incident had occurred, after the crash had occurred. After this homicide had occurred, she went back and applied for a license listing on that nothing was preventing her from obtaining the driver's license. I am curious about that. I do not have that marked and checked by the mother. The modeling, the Halloween, the concert, why is that relevant? And then it says inaudible. Lastly, Your Honor, the state of Ohio just wants to bring this court back to probable cause. What is probable cause? Probable cause is the probable component of the probable cause determination means that the state must produce evidence that raises more than mere suspicion of guilt, but needs not prove or provide evidence proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. At a bind-over hearing prior to binding in juvenile over to common pleas court, the court must find some credible evidence as to each and every element of the offense. The evidence must be credible, not incredible. Furthermore, determination of the merit of competing prosecution and defense theories both of which could be credible, ultimately is a matter of fact for the fact finder at trial. Yeah, theories, both of which could be credible. Your Honor, we would ask that you take all of these things into consideration. The state argues that we have shown some credible evidence. We've met that low burden that we have to prove some credible evidence to each and every count of this complaint, and we ask that you do find probable cause on those counts. Thank you. The court says, "Thank you, Mr. McDonald." Mr. McDonald says, "Your Honor, may it please the court." So I still haven't heard their theory on the case, really. I'll start with that, he says. There's a couple of problems with the prosecutor's case. Number one, no one in court identified my client. That's number one. Number two, Mr. Troop says, "I'm sorry, we stipulated." The court says, "You did not stipulate to identity." McDonald says, "We stipulated to her age. That's it." So that's number one. Number two, problem is that they had a coroner here and I could have asked him questions, but I wasn't going to ask him questions because there's a manner of death and he lists 5 of them and he said one of them is homicide. He said homicide and then he elaborated as to what homicide is. And his exact quote was, "Homicide is when someone takes someone's life." He ruled that out and called it an accident. And that detective brought it to this prosecutor's attention and they didn't do anything. It's not my job to present their case. It's their job. That in of itself means this should go on no further. However, I'm going to respond to what they said in order. Jury's definition: specific intent to kill. Their evidence: 90 miles per hour. Some text messages about the 17th about an incident between Mackenzie and Dominic. It goes both ways. Thank you, McDonald. Thank you, old McDonald had a farm. This is exactly what I said. It goes both ways. Her needing a new trial doesn't mean she's innocent. No, she's clearly innocent to driving the car. I mean, guilty of driving the car, right? I think a lesser charge. And I think some people involved in the case shouldn't have been involved. Conflict of interest. But let's continue. It goes both ways. And then something on the 22nd with some phone where they can't even charge her with the crime. And that is what shows a specific intent to kill, question mark. The prosecutors also completely misstated the evidence that came in terms of prior calculation and design. What they talked about purpose and prior calculation and design in the law, they showed says within minutes. That's the law that they put up there, within minutes. Yes, Sergeant said from 0 to 60 in 19 seconds, maybe 19 to 22, but that's not the evidence. This detective over here agrees that at the turn, the car was going 35 miles per hour, and that's what the speed limit is. This table had the opportunity to present to you the speed of that car once it made that turn. They didn't do it. So all Sergeant said was that a car could go 50 to 80 in 9 seconds, and that's what he said. What the prosecutor said in their statement right there was the car went a quarter mile at 90 miles per hour because that's really all the evidence they have. They can't pinpoint when that car started going fast. They just can't. Exactly. They can't. They can't. The whole case is one giant conflict of interest, says Boo Boo. That's fine, beautifully broken. Let's continue. He says, that's really all the evidence they have. They can't pinpoint when the car started going fast. They just can't. All they can do is take the evidence that they have from those 2 vantage points and calculate what speed is. That's it. And this is very important when we're talking about prior calculation and design and purposely. The prosecutor just said the car was going that speed for a quarter of a mile. Okay, I'm good enough at math to say at 60 miles per hour, if you're going 60 miles per hour, you travel 1 mile in a minute, you go a quarter of a mile in 15 seconds. That's at 60. You go and do the math and you have 90 miles per hour. That's about 9 seconds, which is completely consistent with what Sergeant said, that it was about 9 to 12 second time to get that power up to speed. That's the only evidence there is. So 9 seconds, they want to say that this young girl here did something purposely and with prior calculation and design. The math itself just does not add up. And by the way, this detective was driving 80 miles an hour a couple days ago. I understand why he didn't, and I understand that's reckless, but I don't know you need to take that into consideration. Facts. Zaki Hazu, I'm writing you a ticket. You're getting a ticket from Mellyverse. You were speeding. And I'm writing you a ticket for self-snitching too. Doesn't Bruce always say no self-snitching? Anastasia says the black box pinpoints when the car started going fast as the defense believed otherwise they could have thrown their own expert. Yeah, there's no expert here. Apparently, there's no expert here. He says the prosecutors thought, the court says, wait, you said he doesn't know why he was doing it. McDonald says, no. The court says, okay. McDonald says, I'm saying he was just doing it, going 80 miles per hour. I'm just saying he did it to see the conditions of the road that he said was bumpy. I'm saying it was probably reckless on his part, but okay. The court says to drive 80 miles an hour on that street. McDonald says, right. The court says, got it. McDonald says, I get it. 90 miles an hour, that's reckless. There's no way around that. That's just simply a fact. And while we're talking about the jury instructions in a few minutes, it says it has to be beyond monetary impulse. That's important for you to remember. So they're relying that my client wanted to kill these people because she's going to crash a car. She told him on the 17th, I'll crash this car. Well, if you really believe that, what's he doing getting in the car with her the day after day after day? Amen. Again, why would he stay with her year after year after year after year? Now, if Dom was scared that Kenzie was going to go to the police, now we know other stuff that was going on. If you know, you know. If you don't, find out. We know why Dom was scared of the police. But this is a good point. Why would he continue to get in the car? Why would he continue to date her? If he really believed that, why doesn't he kick her out of the house and have his mother, who's in the legal field, get her thrown out? I'm sure there was a way. I'm sure of it. If Miss Russo really knows that, why did she ever let Mackenzie back in there? Why? Because this is the bottom line here. They're two kids. One is 4 years older. That fight, bicker, et cetera, is an inappropriate way, for certainly nothing to the extent that the drug dealing, gun toting Dominic Russo would be afraid of this 90-pound old girl. The prosecutor said this plan started on July 17th. That's farcical. I don't think I'm going to respond to that. When they talk about the aggravated vehicular homicide, the drugs and the possession of criminal tools, they clearly met their burden. That's no question. Interestingly, the doctor, they said, there could have been no physical reason except that the patrolman from Berea, I think, responded and said the pulse ox was 82. And we heard the doctor, the expert, testify as to what that meant. What credible evidence do they have that this girl came up with the plan to kill these two kids? It makes no sense that she would want to do it. The reason I brought in the two witnesses is to show, one, they were getting along 2 days before, and three, that she's not suicidal. If they're going to argue that it's purposeful, then she knows when she's going to kill herself too, and that's just not her. You can think whatever you want about her, but there's no evidence whatsoever that she's suicidal. And therefore, when you take into account the lack of time that she wasn't suicidal, they just simply haven't proven their case whatsoever. By the way, they did not present any evidence of self-harm. They did not bring any type of suicide note. The officer or sergeant talked about pedal misapplication. On redirect, we talk about pedal misapplication is the gas and the brake. But in direct, he said, yeah, many times people hit the wrong pedal and they just speed. That's what he said. Could she had hit the wrong pedal when she got hit in the face with the airbags? Interesting. So we need to take that into account. All of the witnesses that never mentioned suicide that the detective talked to, the medical records that are replete with POTS, said what POTS is and what the conditions are. The description of Landon, Paul, Rosie, and others about that night. Before that, everybody was in good spirits. There was no fighting. There was no anything. There was that text message that was received 4 a.m. while they were probably asleep that Davion responded to. You've got the time exactly there. You have where Davion's body was found, which to me makes the most sense is he's trying to show something or kids screw around and he's going from the back to the front, which is consistent with where it is. The detective had Detective Glover, who is part of the DEA, go through social media, which I think is shady, go through social media and found not 2 incidents that prosecutors say leads to prior calculation and design, but looks and finds 136 examples of distracted driving, reckless driving, or speed. I think we can all agree that we have all judged Kenzie and Dom for their text messages, right? We can at least come to that determination. That's clearly 136 versus 2 minor incidents that come nowhere near purposely or prior calculation and design. So when you look at all of this, absolutely the state has failed to meet their burden. Thank you. The court says thank you. Close, close. Troop says, yes, Your Honor. It's a probable cause hearing, Your Honor. Our burden is probable cause. Regarding Mackenzie Shirilla's identification, the court received medical records. Her date of birth is stipulated to. Photographs from her cell phone were depicted in court. Her voice was played on the screen. Well, I would have liked to seen the other cell phone too, that we didn't have access to. So I'm still waiting to see those. We've got the right person here, and I think we provided sufficient evidence that we're talking about Mackenzie. For the first time, Mr. McDonald spoke to you. Until just now, he has continually appealed to your emotions. Look at my client. Look at how small she is. She's barely 100 pounds. She's 90. She wants you to take, but he wants you to take that into consideration, and that's not right. You're not supposed to look at her and consider her size. You're not supposed to consider that she's a young girl. That's not fair. She's a child. You're supposed to look at the evidence, and he shouldn't be asking you repeatedly to look at that. And it seems that's being put forth from this side of the aisle to distract you from the evidence. It's a good thing we had a video of Officer Robinson responding with his dash camera, because for 2 witnesses in a row, Mr. McDonald cross-examined these witnesses about all of the potholes and how deep the potholes were. He came in here today, 18 to 25 potholes, 8 to 10 inches deep, and it's just not true. Well, the road was fixed not long after. So do we know for a fact what's true and what's not? I believe. I don't have the exact date, but I'll have to look into that and let you guys know. There's no evidence of that. It's just not true. And so I think it's important to point that out. He wants to say 90 miles an hour was the speed. He wants to say, as he's making his closing argument, 90 miles an hour is going to be the speed. That's not the testimony. The testimony was that at the position of Lincoln Parma Movers building, she was going 97. And then at second point, she was going 98. The other testimony was that just before impact, she had reached a speed of 100. This was taken from the black box from Sergeant McQuaid. She clocked out at 100 miles per hour. It sounds better if they say 90. It's easier to convince you if we go with that number, but that's not accurate. We can't pinpoint exactly when the car started going fast. Okay, if you can't pinpoint it, then I have a problem with that. He admits we cannot pinpoint exactly when the car first started going fast, but we can go from the building where the second video was taken. We can go from there from the Lincoln Parma Movers. So basically what they're saying is they can't pinpoint what was going on in that car. Respectfully, that's what that means. If she's going 98 miles per hour at that point, and it doesn't take a lot of math to know that it takes her 20 seconds or more, as testified by Mark Sargent, to get up to that speed, that she got on that gas pedal well before she reached the Parma Movers, and she never took her foot off the gas. Our theory of the case, we're not required to prove a theory of the case, but what we have showed is regardless of whether that is a suicide attempt or whether she really just thought that because she was strapped into her seatbelt, maybe she was so small and that the 2 boys weren't, maybe she thought she could walk away from that. No. I don't think that makes any sense. I think when somebody puts a foot on the gas pedal and never takes it off until the car collides with the concrete and brick structure, I think that shows intent. What about the building, the car, the curb? What about the hydroplaning? Hello? Why are they leaving things out that are important? I'm very confused. Maybe they'll come up in the next trial. I have those documents too. Um, but I have a problem with that. I think that showed purpose, and I think she's lucky to be here. I think she's fortunate that she survived her intentional, purposeful, planned conduct. If it was the other way around in 2 weeks and some change before a person used a firearm on someone to take their life, there was a recording or witness who said, I heard somebody say I was going to shoot them, and then they did. Then it really matters. What Chris, AKA Hench, heard over the telephone, I'm going to crash this car. She had thought about it. Get the calls. I don't know. Can't they subpoena the phone? Hench's phone? I don't believe that. I need proof of that. I don't believe Hench. And that's just my opinion. I don't believe it. No, I don't think she thought that. Kenzie loved herself. Really. Airbags deployed before the crash, I thought. Yeah, they did. They did. They deployed when the airbags, the car thought it was rolling over. She uttered it. It was something that she was capable of, and it really, really becomes important when she does it. When she follows up and fills that plan out, it becomes important. You can infer things from the evidence that's been presented. You can infer because Dominic Russo is sitting in his house, locked in his house, while Mackenzie's breaking the doorknob and threatening to damage his car. You can infer things. I've been thinking about that fight with the video, and who records that? Like, not that I'm saying Dom did the wrong thing in recording it, but it feels very wrong to me because it's like, well, we know how you were with her too. And Kenzie threatened a lot of things, but she never went to the police. She never ratted you out like she threatened you to. At the end of the day, they're just words and they're threats, but like she never actually did it. Let's consider that. They both recorded each other, which proves how toxic it was. She never claimed that. She doesn't know what happened. Yeah, Kenzie never did claim that either. She could have lied. If Kenzie really is who we think she is, she could have lied and blamed it on them. Isn't that like possible too? I don't believe the hench story either. What I understand is why the lie. Well, like I said, there's a whole history behind that. And it matters to me. What would make a man get on his cell phone and record this conversation? What would cause him to do that? You can infer that it must have happened before. You can infer that from that evidence that he was doing that for a reason. He was saving that so he could speak to you. This is what she's capable of when you listen to those. You'll hear Dominic saying, what are you going to do, Kenzie? Why do you keep threatening me? Why is he recording this? It's important. Prosecutor Kupak or whatever wanted to show State's Exhibit 1, and I did too, because I think this is so important to the case. I think what was on Dom's phone is important to the case too, and we don't have that. Who blamed them? I don't believe anything Angelo says. Ooh, I got a good video regarding Angelo. I'm debating on whether I want to show it on here or not. Public information. You can thank the Freedom of Information Act, respectfully. You have a problem with that? Who created the Freedom of Information Act? U.S. Congress, signed by the President Lyndon B. Johnson on July 4th, 1966. Take it up with President Lyndon B. Johnson. Okay, thank you. Respectfully. Let's move on. When Mackenzie's driving down Pearl and turns onto Progress, you cannot make a more controlled turn. She's in control of this car. She's in control of this car and remains in control of this car. The evidence is more than probable cause here, Judge. Judge, she never takes her foot off the gas pedal. This is controlled. This is a plan. She knows the street. She's been on the street several times with recent, close in time to this event, and the detective testified to this. She knows the street. Well, we know that has been debunked because even the victim's family has said that it's a usual route. So there's that. She knows it's a location that dead ends into a brick building. She knows that it's a generally straight street with some curves. She knows where it ends. It's not an accident that this occurred where it occurred. This is not an out of control drive down Progress. It's not out of control. When you watch the video, when you see the dash cam of Officer Robinson's cruiser, you will see the steep S turn that is in that road. That is not a car that somebody could have lost control of. And Judge, I want to play the state's exhibit of the actual impact because the court asked Allison, where was that right hard turn? And the evidence is that the black box recorded the last 5 seconds, approximately the last 5 seconds. Okay, but what about before that? We don't know that, Abuelita, though, because they were breaking up. Okay, based on what? Based on text? But they broke up every other day. So, like, how could we go based off of that? Yeah, other people said they were breaking up. Other people also said that they were fine. So, there's that. That's when the first triggering event woke the black box up. It woke the black box up when there was a rollover event, to be clear. I want you to listen to the car before it gets even to the last 5 seconds. And when you come back from the crash, the last 5 seconds, you will see a missile. You won't see a person driving the car. The court says, for purposes of the record, Mackenzie is leaving the courtroom while you play the video. Troop says, when you look at the last 5 seconds of this video, you try to determine where somebody makes a hard right turn and you compare it with the testimony. This is not a situation where somebody's in the car steering and turning. These are reactions and actions with the car. Troop says, while the court is in front of the screen, I'll point out that the sign on this exhibit was lit up at the end of Progress. It was lit up. Why don't they bring in the curb, the hydroplaning? There's a video of all of that. I don't get it. They should have to show receipts for the hench call. I do agree with that, Abuelita. Her standing outside assaulting his doorknob. Yeah, but Shug, does that prove a murder? I hope not, because me and my ex fought. And I hope that doesn't make me a murder now. If you go back and pull my text from 1,000 years ago. Mackenzie Shirilla's car left the street and aimed in a direct beeline for that sign. It hit it square. The track showed it heading directly towards that sign. The only lighted object at the end of the street, and that's why she never took her foot off the gas pedal. And that's why she never made an attempt to hit the brake. No, I don't agree with that. We proved probable cause here, Your Honor. I don't know if it was suicide, and I don't know what she planned. I don't know how she planned to do what she did. Okay. Didn't you just say there was intention and premeditation? But you're saying you don't know how she planned to do what she did? Is that not contradicting itself? Am I not understanding English appropriately? He says, I don't know if that was suicide and I don't know how she planned to do what she did, but you can't see this and square it with the fact that this was not a medically caused incident. This was not caused from Toyota failure. It wasn't caused because something was wrong with the meticulously maintained Camry. This was conduct that was calculated to cause death. Thank you. The court says, is your argument still prior calc and design if you take into consideration and find credible the evidence that just happened on the street that day, not taking into consideration or not finding credible the arguments with respect to July 17th and July 21st? Troop says, absolutely. Yes, Your Honor. She's clearly under control. She has clearly selected this as a street where this was going to take place. How? I mean, it's not funny because there's a serious thing going on here. R.I.P. Dom and Davion. I wish they were here. I really do. think they're both handsome and smart, and I don't think they're shit people either. As much as we know what was going on, like, it's a two-way street here. They both made mistakes. It was a bad relationship. Like, we get it. Um, She gets on the gas pedal at such an early time on Progress Drive and never gets off of it. She could have got it off of it before she got up to 100 miles an hour at Parma Movers. I'm sorry, 98 miles an hour. She could have got off the gas after that. She could have tried to touch the brake pedal. She never did. She was committed. But hypothetically, let's say there was airbags in her face and 4 point something seconds. Is that really enough time? Especially with a car hydroplaning. Hmm. She could have tried to touch the brake pedal. She never did. She was committed. This is pure commitment. The court says, thank you. Chip says, thank you. The court says, I'm obviously not going to make a decision today. There's been very extensive testimony and number of exhibits that I still need to go through in detail. I would ask the state of Ohio provide me with a copy of the case law that you cited in your closing argument. I'm also going to ask whether you have any case law as it relates to the identification at a probable cause hearing, because I too noticed that at the close of your case. And one, the relevance of it at probable cause hearing, so a bind over proceeding, but also identification as it relates to maybe the person's name being used or, photos. But there was never a single witness that came in here and said, the person that I extricated from that car, the person whose body I examined, the person's who medical records are, the person I went and visited at Metro and I spoke to her, not a single person was asked to say, is that the same person? Do you see that person in the courtroom or do you compare the photos? And this is a court. Exactly. There was never a single witness that went in there. Facts. Where's all them witnesses? Where's all them at? There's no identification on her voice on that phone to say that's the voice of her or that the photos that are on the screen match up with the same person in the courtroom. Thank you. The court's saying we don't have proof of her voice saying, I'm going to crash this car. Wild. That's just your opinion, though, Barbie. You're not an expert, respectfully. So is the court able to infer that based on, and I'm not either, so I'm not claiming I am. So is the court able to infer that based on the totality of all of the testimony and the photos that were presented without an actual in-court identification? Okay. Troop says, thank you, Your Honor. The court says, all right, thank you everyone for your patience. Thank you for, as difficult as a lot of this was, maintaining composure. I honestly don't even want to put a date on when I can give you a decision because I don't know how long it's going to take for me to go through all of this and then to receive the case law. I also too am going to do some research as it relates to the issue because I've honestly never had that come up at a probable cause hearing before. And Mr. McDonald, you're going to be tied up next week, correct? In another trial? He says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, okay, so how about that's starting on Monday? He says, but we always hope that they not go forward. The court says, sure, how about we'll touch base with you guys maybe like Monday and kind of figure out where we're at then, and then we can pick a date. I do not issue decisions by journal entry, so that's not something I will do. I will bring you back in and roll on the record if everyone's okay with that. Okay, have a great weekend. Done. No, Pepper, giving it to me doesn't mean anything. I want it to go into trial. I want everything. I want her to have a retrial, and bring everything in. The Russo's history, Dom's phone, witnesses, experts, people that knew her. That's what I want. That's what I want. All the evidence to go in. All the proof of her saying she's going to crash the car. All of it. Including the car hydroplaning and hitting the curb. Including why Dom's phone wasn't brought in. Including why his mom had the right to disinclude that when it was going on with one of her cases, who are rug dealers, all of that. Why Glover was involved in this. All of it. And that's her call too. If she wants another child, then she knows that if she gets the same or worse punishment, then maybe that's a risk she's willing to take. And if she is, that speaks volumes to me. It all needs to get out there. All of it. All of the conflicts of interest involved. Airborne. They should have taken Dom's phone. Chucks, you need to get onto some channels and read stuff. There's a lot out there. I feel sad for everyone. Manipulated is a word you're looking for. They were both out of control, not just Kenzie. Popping perks and selling lean is out of control. We may not think it, but let's come to terms with the facts that there was a lot here going on. So we're done with that part of those transcripts. I have one more and then I have the regular trial, but I'm going to take a break from I'm doing deeper research on what we have already read. So we're going to have a live and we're going to compare stuff, pull case laws, et cetera, et cetera. And I have another live coming up with the update today. And I want to go over that too, but I need to review a couple more sources. So therefore, yes, we will be continuing to talk about the Kenzie case. We will be continuing to cover other cases as well. I will probably, I don't know how fast I could read through some stuff to come back tonight, but I also have a Bubba interview we're going to review, and we're going to go back to Taylor Parker as well. I have some new stuff on her, and we have a members only coming up. So get your drinks, get your popcorn. There's links so that you can help whoever your little heart desires. You want to support the victims. Kenzie also has cases. There's a petition if you want to go sign it that talks about that for retrial. There's all kinds of things out there. So I have to get caught up with my descriptions, but I will link everything. I'm not here to change your mind. We're just reviewing documents. And I was given these transcripts. I obtained them from someone, and I'm so very grateful. And we're going to go through all of it. So thank you for being here. Please, please, please make sure you guys hit the like button. I will. J. Lou says, mods, you're on top of it. I just saw one comment disappear. Yeah, we're trying to keep it cool. You guys know how my channel is. That isn't a fair question for you to answer for all of YouTube. I didn't answer for all of YouTube. I never answered anything for all of YouTube. I'm speaking on behalf of my channel and me. I'm not a legal expert. I'm not paid by the Shirillas. I'm not hating on anyone. I'm not taking sides. I literally think there's a lot of issues going on with this trial. I'll delete my own question as it wasn't right for me to ask. What question? And thank you, Karen Doll, for becoming a new member. I appreciate you. We have a members only coming up. Oh, Chucks, thank you, love. I didn't see you gifted. And Melissa Hertz became a member too. Who got the gifted membership? I was probably reading. Did I miss it? I'm sure I can go back and review it. Who got it? Mods, did you see who got it? That's very kind. Chuck's gifted a membership for those who want to be present for the members only. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Does not go unnoticed. The question you had just said, Melly, did you ever watch the drone video? I need to rewatch it again. Yeah. Did she get a fair trial? Maybe not. Did she get her fair sentence? Absolutely, says Boomer. Hey, I don't get mad for your opinions. Like, I honestly do respect everyone's opinions. We're just conversating. Hey, Vicky. I didn't see who got it, but I'll go back and look. Thank you for those of you who donated. Okay, keep your eye on the lookout for if I come back tonight with the Kenzie case update. If not, you will see probably a couple. Oh, you're coming back tonight? Yeah, I want to come back tonight. I need to get it together. So with the information and documents. So if I can quickly do that, then yeah, I'll be back tonight. If not, we might have multiple lives tomorrow. So please come back. Melly, did you get autopsy report? Autopsy reports have been sealed by request of the victim's family, but I did try to get my hands on that. I am in communications with someone at the medical examiner's office. So hopefully those get released soon. I became a member too. Oh, thank you, Christina. Is that from the gift of membership? Did I miss it? Was that the gift of membership? Anyways, thank you for being here. Please, please, please hit the like button. Shout out to the replay viewers. I want to know what's on Dom's phone. It could prove everything we will never know. Please come back. Melly, I respect you as you know. I know, Chuck, so you know I got mad love for you all of you who are here. Mad love for you guys. Mad love for my mods. Free Mackenzie Shirilla in here. Love to you too. Everyone that is in here supporting. I appreciate it. Okay, keep your eye on the lookout for notifications for either later today or tomorrow. I'll see. But thank you for being here and I'll catch you on the next one. Toodles.